Robb Stark stood alone in the godwood of Riverrun, breath steaming in the cool evening air, the damp moss soft beneath his boots. He had come here for silence, for a moment of clarity as war pressed against his every waking hour. In the darkness of the canopy, the ancient trees loomed overhead with their thick trunks and tangled branches, leaves rustling softly in the night breeze. A single moonbeam slipped through, illuminating motes of dust that danced around him in a swirl. The heart tree's white bark shone faintly in the gloom, the ruddy sap-like face seeming to stare into his soul. He had grown used to these silent vigils, speaking prayers in his mind, yet tonight he could hardly remember a time he had felt at peace. Word of his father's imprisonment in King's Landing plagued him, fueling his determination but also stoking a chill dread in his heart. War would soon close its jaws on them all. And so he prayed to the old gods for guidance. Yet, prayers or not, the burden of kingship of responsibility already weighed heavy upon him. Though he had not been crowned, his bannermen looked to him as their leader. Catelyn Stark, his mother, had counseled caution but also promised support. She believed in him. The Northern Lords believed in him. All the men who now marched under the dire wolf banner put their trust in him to free Lord Eddard, to defend the North, to secure justice. Robb had taken on the mantle with a certain reluctant pride, though he was uncertain of his own readiness. And now, hidden away in the godwood, he felt the forest's hush pressing in upon him like a warning. When he'd left Winterfell, summer still clung to the days. But traveling south, deeper into the Riverlands, the precarious season had shifted around him. His men joked that perhaps the young wolf carried the chill with him, a rumor that scuttled through the camps like a wisp of smoke. He was only a boy of 15, some said. He was born in the north, others replied, and the blood of the first men ran strong in him. If that were not enough, the name Stark was known across the 7 kingdoms. So, perhaps it was not so strange that he would command their loyalty. But in the quiet of his own mind, Robb wondered if even that would be enough to save them from the might of the Lannisters. He turned from the heart tree, squaring his shoulders, hearing the faint echo of footsteps on damp grass. From between the trees, Grey Wind emerged, his great dire wolf eyes gleaming in the dim moonlight. Robb laid a hand upon the beast's thick gray fur. It was enough to feel that small rush of solidarity. He was not alone here. Even in his darkest hour, Grey Wind stood at his side. And the memory flickered in his mind, that day, not so long ago, when all had changed. When he'd discovered something that might alter the fortunes of House Stark forever. A secret whose full revelation would soon reshape the battle to come. He remembered the nights in Winterfell's crypts after the snows had melted away. He had gone down in search of something Catelyn said might be there, a gift from his late Aunt Lyanna. At first, he thought it was some precious relic, an heirloom lost to the dust. But as he descended with only a feeble torch to light the gloom, Grey Wind at his side, the labyrinthine tomb walls had revealed a hidden alcove behind the statue of King Brandon the Shipwright. A small passage, half-blocked by the rubble of time. Nestled within, half-buried, had been an object that seemed carved from night itself. A dragon egg, the surface a swirl of silver and deep blue, like starlight dancing upon the waters of a cold northern sea. He could still recall the jolt of awe he felt upon first touching it. The shell was so smooth, yet ridged with subtle scales, giving it an ancient, inscrutable feel. How it came to lie in the crypts of Winterfell, he could not guess. Some whispered that the Targaryens had once gifted the Starks an egg centuries ago in a gesture of alliance that never saw the light of day. Others said it had been stolen from some decadent hoard. But the old tales insisted that dragon eggs were mere stone after centuries and would never hatch. He had told no one of it at first, uncertain if it was only a strange curiosity. He tucked it away among his belongings as he left Winterfell, the weight of the thing a mystery and a promise. It wasn't until they were encamped near Moat Cailin that something impossible occurred. Nights grew restless, Robb's dreams seemed touched by fire. When he pressed his hand to that shell one chilly dawn, he felt the faintest hint of warmth in the egg, as though embers glowed at its core. At first, he dismissed it as the heat of his own hands, but the warmth never faded. Each night afterward, he dreamed of wings and roaring flames, of the smell of smoke and charred bone. And by day, a small anxious thrill rose in his chest whenever he thought of the egg. Then came the fateful night. A storm brewed and lightning flashed across the sky. Rain poured so heavily upon the tents that the men huddled in their bedrolls, wrapping cloaks tight about themselves. Robb, mind spinning with war councils and the dread of marching onward, stared at the egg resting in the corner of his tent. Grey Wind paced near the entrance as though sensing something imminent. When the lightning struck just outside and thunder rattled every canvas, Robb swore he saw the shell shimmer. Something pulsed within the swirling pattern of silver and blue. He crawled toward it on his hands and knees, heart pounding, a wild thought blossoming in his mind. Could it be? The old stories told of Targaryens hatching dragons with fire and blood. But Robb had neither Valyrian blood nor dragon's fire. And yet, the egg seemed alive. He pressed his hands to it. In the open gap of the tent flap, a sudden gust of wind and swirling rain drenched him. Lightning snaked across the sky again, revealing the direwolf's eyes glinting at him in the darkness. A crack echoed, more subtle than thunder, like a thin piece of porcelain snapping. Then a second crack, more ominous, more certain. Steam rose around the egg as fissures appeared along the shell. An electric jolt of raw possibility raced through Robb, holding him enthralled, fear and wonder mingling in equal measure. Then a chunk of shell broke away, revealing wetness within, a glimmer of movement. And with a final crack, a tiny, serpentine creature tumbled out. A baby dragon, no larger than the length of Robb's forearm. He could scarcely breathe. Its wings were thin membranes, tinted a bluish silver, the same shade as the shell from which it had emerged. Its slender body was the color of midnight, dotted with flecks of pale luminescence. The newborn dragon's eyes flicked open, revealing pupils that caught the lightning's glow and reflected it with eerie intensity. For a moment, everything in Robb's world stopped. Outside, the storm raged, the war still waited. But here, in this tent, he had witnessed the rebirth of legend. Gray wind let out a low whine, ears flattening. The dragon let out a thin, reedy cry, as though calling out for something. Robb, near trembling, cupped his hands around it. Warmth flooded from the creature's slick scales, tiny claws pricking his flesh. He smiled despite the shock. The dragon craned its neck, bright eyes locking onto Robb's gaze. And in that fleeting instant, a thread of connection formed between them. It was not mere fascination. It felt as though something deep and old recognized him, and in return he recognized it. From that night on, everything changed. He could not march openly with a dragon at his side. Even a small one would spread rumor like wildfire, and the Lannisters had ears everywhere. So he kept it hidden, feeding it scraps of meat, forging a quiet bond in the shadows of the growing host. When they reached the twins to treat with Walder Frey, Robb disguised the dragon's presence. He suspected that the cunning old man would not hesitate to betray them for personal gain if he learned of such a secret. Only a handful of trusted companions, Theon Greyjoy, Greatjon Umber, and Catelyn Stark, caught glimpses of the small reptile. They questioned him, but he told them only what he knew for sure, that it had hatched from the egg, and it seemed to have chosen him. There were no illusions about the potential power of a living dragon, or the political ramifications of a Stark in possession of one. A rumor might see them labeled heretics or worse, pretenders to a Targaryen claim. They had enough enemies without courting that. Yet day by day the dragon grew, feeding on fresh game. Its wings strengthened. Flames sparked in its throat, small jets of fire that smoked in the damp air. Often, Robb walked alone at twilight, the young dragon perched on his leather glove, a hooded cloak hiding them. He practiced commands with it, though it understood him more intuitively than he'd ever anticipated. He called it Saphrax, a name gleaned from the old histories he found among the books at Moat Cailin, referencing some storied Valyrian champion. The beast responded to his voice, even took to the air in short bursts, though it was not yet large enough to carry him. Over the weeks, as the war turned more desperate, it became harder to keep Saphrax concealed. The time would come, Robb believed, when the secret would have to be unleashed on the battlefield. That time found him in the Riverlands soon after their crossing as they prepared to outmaneuver the Lannisters. News came of Tywin Lannister's host pressing down from the west. Meanwhile, Ser Jaime Lannister led another vanguard. The scouts reported that Jaime had laid siege to Riverrun, capturing the Tully Lord, Edmure. Robb had to choose his battles carefully. He feigned a move towards Tywin, sent part of his forces to meet the lion's share of the Lannister army while he led a smaller contingent west, aiming to lift the siege of Riverrun. If they captured or killed Jaime, they would have leverage indeed. Strategy was the board, Jaime was the piece he meant to take. At first, there was no notion of revealing the dragon so soon. The men were fierce, loyal, all too ready to fight for their young lord. Robb had proven himself with cunning, anticipating the Lannisters' moves. But rumors traveled among the soldiers. Some had seen the fleeting shape of a winged creature gliding overhead at night, a flicker of reflected moonlight. Others claimed they saw Robb slip out alone to the forests. Whispers of dire magic and the old gods circulated. And though no one quite knew the truth, awe and fear spread among the ranks. Only Catelyn Stark, who had glimpsed the dragon feeding one dawn, had come to Robb and asked him, voice low and tense, "Are you certain of what you are doing?" He'd answered that he was not certain of any of it, but if they were to rescue his father and stand against the might of the Iron Throne, they needed every advantage. "The old gods have placed this power in my hands," he had said. "I must use it or we risk losing everything." And though she did not look entirely convinced, she did not forbid him. She knew as well as he did that they were at war. A dragon might tip the balance. The night of the whispering would arrive in a hush of anticipation. Robb's men lay in wait among the thick trunks of oak and ash, their armor muffled, their breathing hushed. A pale moon illuminated drifting mist that wreathed the undergrowth. Branches stirred like restless spirits overhead. This forest had gained its name from the perpetual sigh of wind through leaves, a subtle susurration that seemed to whisper warnings of what was to come. Robb arranged his forces expertly, splitting them into groups that would encircle Jaime's forward units once they attempted to pass. As the main trap closed, they would take Jaime and bring the might of the Lannisters to its knees in one swift blow. Grey wind prowled at Robb's side, nose testing the air. Hidden in a dense thicket, Robb pressed a hand against the scaled flank of Saphrax, who now stood the height of a large hound at the shoulder. The dragon had grown quickly on a diet of fresh kills. Bony ridges lined its spine, and its wings seemed powerful even folded tight against its body. Its eyes glimmered with primal intelligence. Robb had not dared to mount the creature in flight yet. Saphrax still seemed too small, though it was robust in build. In truth, Robb suspected the moment was near. Some days prior, Saphrax had flown short distances carrying a weighted harness. It was only a matter of confidence for both rider and dragon. The horns sounded in the distance. Jaime Lannister's vanguard approached down a winding path through the forest, the clank of armor and harness drifting through the gloom. The men braced themselves, hearts pounding. For many, this was their first direct confrontation with the Kingslayer's personal force. Tension crackled like static in the humid air. Robb could see flickers of torchlight bouncing across tree trunks, bobbing through the fog. They were close. His plan relied on stealth. They would wait until Jaime's men had ventured past, then the northern cavalry would sweep in from behind and both flanks, boxing them in. Perhaps it would have gone just as in the original telling, with Robb's cavalry thundering out of the darkness, the horns of the north braying. Perhaps the young lord would have proven his cunning once more, capturing Jaime alive without the dragon ever showing itself. But fate, or the gods, had other plans. Suddenly, across the forest gloom came the low menacing wail of a horn not their own. It was deeper, reverberating. Robb's scouts had not spied the small flank of riders that Jaime had sent ahead. They roared in warning, having discovered the hidden northern lines. All secrecy shattered at once. Shouts and the clangor of steel came from the western portion of the woods where a group of outriders engaged the northern pickets. The Lannisters knew an ambush waited. Robb realized that if he did not act quickly, Jaime might retreat or take a different route. Battle was inevitable. He gave the signal with a sharp whistle. Shapes exploded from the underbrush. Mounted knights of the north galloped forth, brandishing steel, their horses' eyes rolling. War cries rose through the half-lit forest as men crashed into the Lannister column. In the confusion, torchbearers scattered. The once orderly line of knights under Jaime's command splintered. Some attempted to form a shield wall, others rushed forward in the dark. It was chaos. Robb urged his mount out from behind a massive tree trunk, brandishing his sword. Grey wind bounded alongside, snarling and leaping upon any foe in reach. The first wave of conflict was brutal and swift. Screams merged with the squeal of horses, and the hush of the whispering wood was lost under the din of mortal strife. As steel clashed and men fell, Robb spied Jaime Lannister's glinting gold armor deeper along the path. The Kingslayer, noticing the ambush, barked orders to rally his guard. Robb set his jaw, spurring his horse forward, sword raised high. Around him, the fury of the north unleashed. Men roared the stark words, "Winter is coming," their voices thick with fervor. The Lannisters, outmaneuvered and outnumbered in these tight confines, scrambled to organize. But Jaime was no fool, he recognized the danger. He began to cut his way back, aiming to break free from the encirclement. That was when Robb felt a surge of fierce energy at his side. Saphrax, agitated by the tumult, spread its wings. The dragon had followed, stalking just behind Robb's horse. Now, the thunder of battle seemed to awaken something primal in it. Sparks glowed at the edges of its mouth and a thin stream of flame erupted, scorching a pair of Lannister spearmen who had foolishly rushed near. Their screams rose in the swirling mist and the stench of burning flesh wafted. Nearby northern soldiers recoiled, startled by the living flame. Shock gripped friend and foe alike. A dragon, a living dragon here. Many men whispered of Targaryen nightmares, though this was a Stark leading them. As the line threatened to break in multiple places, Robb knew in an instant that half measures would do no more. Stealth was lost. The men needed something to unite them, to terrify the opposition, to deliver the fearsome blow that would keep the Lannisters from regrouping and escaping the trap. With a sudden twist of his body, he swung down off his horse, letting it gallop away into the fray. Grey Wind trotted anxiously beside him, but Robb knelt at the dragon's side. Saphrax let out a low hiss, wings expanding, ready for flight. He had never attempted to mount the dragon in full armor, let alone in the heat of battle. But desperation lent him resolve. A swirl of intangible connection pulsed between them, a bond forged from the night the egg had hatched. Saphrax stepped forward, pressing its scaled flank against him. Flames licked around its nostrils, flickering with each breath. Robb took a quick measure of the dragon's back, found the ridges behind its shoulders, and hoisted himself up. The creature buckled for a moment beneath his weight, but only for a moment. Then it rose, wings half extended, trembling with anticipation. The first beats of those wings drew swirling leaves and dust into the air. Nearby men yelled, some in awe, others in fear. Saphrax sprang upward, claws tearing the forest floor, and leapt. Robb's stomach lurched as they soared 10 feet, then crashed back down. The space between the trees was cramped for a beast of such wingspan. Saphrax roared in frustration, scattering Lannister soldiers who could scarcely believe their eyes. With a snarl, the dragon leapt again, slashing at branches, sending splinters raining down. This time, it gained more height, weaving through the lower limbs, seeking an open path to the sky. Robb clung fiercely, heart pounding like a war drum. They rose higher, pushing past the tangled canopy. Branches scraped Robb's cloak and armor. But then, suddenly, the cool night air enveloped them. The forest spread beneath, a moonlit mosaic of leaves. And in the clearing they had left behind, men fought and died in a swirling melee. From his vantage above, Robb saw pockets of gold and steel locked in bloody combat with the northern host. He could make out the swirl of his dire wolf bounding among enemies. The vantage was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. He felt the wind snatch at his hair, the press of Saphrax's body beneath him, muscles coiling with elemental power. It was real. He was in the sky riding a dragon. A trembling thrill shot through him. He took in a breath of the crisp night, then leaned forward and guided Saphrax with his knees and voice. The dragon understood the unspoken desire to strike. A guttural hiss emerged from its throat, and it pitched forward, diving back into the fray. From the vantage above the treetops, Robb spotted Jaime Lannister, shining like a beacon among his men, forging a path northward in an attempt to escape the trap. If Jaime escaped, the entire plan would be for naught. Without hesitation, Robb guided Saphrax into a downward plunge. He felt the acceleration, wind rushing past his ears, and braced himself. Saphrax dived through a gap in the canopy, snapping limbs and raining leaves. Gold-cloaked knights looked up in astonishment as the black-blue shape barreled out of the darkness. With a roar that seemed to shake the ground, the dragon exhaled a jet of flame that engulfed half a dozen men instantly. Screams of agony mingled with the roar of the blaze. Horses panicked, rearing, throwing their riders. Robb felt no triumph at their horror, only grim necessity. War demanded such brutality when one faced an enemy who would do the same. Or worse. He tightened his grip on the ridges of Saphrax's neck, scanning for Jaime among the chaos. He caught the gleam of that polished armor. Jaime, to his credit, was rallying a cluster of knights, shouting for them to form up. But the sight of a dragon had struck fear deep into their hearts. Their lines wavered. Some turned to flee outright, ignoring their commander's orders. Robb circled overhead, forcing Saphrax to hover. The dragon flapped powerful wings, stirring a swirl of dust and leaves. In that moment, Robb raised a sword, voice booming in challenge. "Surrender, Kingslayer, or feel the wrath of the North." Jaime Lannister looked up, face partially hidden behind his gilded helm, but Robb could imagine the shock in those pale green eyes. Still, Jaime was no coward. He ignored the command, turning to his men. "Rally to me," he bellowed. "We break free to the west." A group of knights attempted to charge forward, lances pointed skyward, hoping perhaps to skew the dragon or unseat its rider. But their lances never met flesh. Saphrax spat a stream of fire that forced them back in a flailing scramble. Below, more of Robb's men flooded in. The Great John roared like a bear, splitting a Lannister knight's skull with a monstrous swing. The river lords pressed from the opposite flank, cutting off any retreat. Bit by bit, Jaime's forces were encircled, pinned in the center of a ring of steel and roaring flames. The stench of smoke clung to every breath, and the once whispering wood was alive with the shrieks of men and the chaotic glow of firelight licking the trees. Now Jaime had no choice but to fight in earnest for his life. His sword flashed, parrying blow after blow from the ring of opponents. He cut down a northern bannerman, then spurred his horse to leap over a fallen log in a desperate bid for open ground. But Saphrax descended once more in front of him, thunderous. The horse reared, nearly unseating the knight. Jaime's face twisted, golden hair plastered with sweat where it stuck out from the edges of his helm. Another soldier close by fell screaming as the dragon's claws tore through plate mail like parchment. Robb dismounted in a hurried lunge, thumping onto the ground a short distance from Jaime, brandishing his sword. He preferred to face the Kingslayer man-to-man if it came to that. Grey Wind joined him, blood spattering the wolf's jaws. The dire wolf snarled, hackles bristling. Jaime, breathing hard, turned to face Robb. He recognized that retreat was no longer an option. The hush of the forest night was gone, replaced by the primal roar of flames and the clang of steel. Soldiers on both sides gave the two warriors a wide berth, forming a ring in which the swirl of conflict paused. "This is how the North fights its wars now," Jaime taunted, though Robb could hear the strain in his voice. Hiding behind scaled abominations and monstrous wolves? Robb's eyes narrowed. "A fair fight is the one you lose, Kingslayer. Or would you prefer I killed you from the sky?" Jaime sneered beneath the rim of his helm. "Come then, boy. Show me if you've learned anything at all." He spurred his horse, sword raised. Robb sidestepped deftly, avoiding the brunt of the charge. Their blades rang as they clashed, and the horse surged past. Robb turned with practiced grace. He had trained under Ser Roderick Castle, learned the fundamentals of swordsmanship well, and though Jaime Lannister was a famed warrior, the man was weighed down by the fight, his men's terror, and the shock of seeing a dragon. Robb circled, Grey Wind prowling at his side, while Saphrax hissed, smoke trailing from its nostrils. A hush fell over the ring of onlookers as the two squared off again. Jaime dismounted in a fluid movement, dropping to the ground with the arrogance of a man who believed himself unstoppable. They exchanged blows, steel biting steel, sparks flying. Jaime's skill was evident, his footwork swift, his blade cunning. But for all his talents, Robb fought with the righteous fury of a son avenging his father's imprisonment, defending his homeland. And he had allies no man could contest. Grey Wind feinted, causing Jaime to split his attention for a crucial instant. Robb lunged, nearly breaking Jaime's guard. The Kingslayer cursed, pivoted, and slashed in a riposte that caught Robb's upper arm, scoring a shallow cut. Pain flared, but Robb held firm, adjusting his stance, drawing on every ounce of skill. Jaime tried another thrust, a classic move that had won him many bouts. Robb knocked the blade aside with a deft parry. Grey Wind lunged in the same breath, jaws snapping. Jaime twisted away, but not before the dire wolf's teeth raked across his golden vambrace, leaving deep grooves. Off balance, Jaime stumbled, and Robb kicked forward, slamming his boot into Jaime's chest. The Kingslayer went down hard, losing his sword as it clattered across the leaf-strewn ground. Instantly, half a dozen northern spearmen closed in, but Robb gestured them back. "He's mine," he said, voice low. He pressed his blade's tip to Jaime's throat. Blood trickled from the edges of Jaime's split lip. His chest heaved, eyes furious, but he was beaten. "Surrender," Robb commanded, looking down at the man who had once been the pride of the King's Guard. Around them, the ring of watchers saw the once mighty champion pinned in the mud. Jaime's arrogance faded, replaced by cold resignation. He glanced at the towering form of Saphrax, whose steaming breath and watchful eyes promised a swift, fiery end if the man tried anything. Slowly, Jaime raised his hands in submission. "It would seem, Stark," he said, voice ragged, "that you hold the trump card this night." Then, more quietly, "I yield." A roar of triumph erupted from the northern men. Horns sounded to signal their victory. The pockets of Lannister resistance collapsed in a matter of minutes, with many knights yielding or fleeing into the dark where outriders would hunt them down. The battle had turned decisively with the unleashing of Robb's secret. The men began to chant, "The young wolf," and "For the North," filling the night air with a jubilant fervor. Some stared at the dragon in a sort of reverent fear, crossing themselves as if warding off an evil spirit. Others cheered the monstrous beast for delivering them from an otherwise bloody entanglement. It was as if a living legend had manifested among them, reborn from the ashes of myth. Robb, panting, kept his sword at Jaime's throat for a long moment, forcing the man to taste the bitter truth of defeat. Then he called for manacles. "Take Ser Jaime Lannister alive," he ordered, "and see that he is kept under heavy guard." Several men hurried to obey, hauling the Kingslayer to his feet. Jaime cast one last furious glance at Robb before they dragged him away. As the battle's aftermath settled in, Robb turned to Saphrax, who regarded him with something akin to pride. The dragon's presence radiated heat, a tangible wave that offset the night's chill. Robb could hardly believe that it was done, that they had triumphed so profoundly. Gray wind nudged Robb's injured arm, whimpering softly at the scent of blood. Robb winced, patting the wolf. The wound was shallow, though it stung fiercely. His men parted to let him pass as he made his way through the carnage, surveying the cost. Bodies in Lannister gold littered the ground, along with a lesser number of northern dead. The victory was theirs, but it had not come without a price. Still, capturing Jaime was beyond a major coup. It was the entire reason he had split his army, and now, with the dragon revealed, he had hammered home the North's advantage in a way the Lannisters could never have foreseen. Catelyn Stark emerged from among the surviving Riverlanders, face pale. She gasped at the sight of Robb's wounded arm, but relief shone through her eyes when she realized he was otherwise unharmed. He could see the awe lingering in her expression, too, as she took in the sight of the dragon perched among the wreckage. She placed a hand over her mouth, tears threatening. "You've done it?" she whispered, voice trembling with equal parts concern and wonder. "You've captured the Kingslayer." Robb lowered his gaze. "We have, but we must not linger. Tywin's host remains a threat, and we must free Uncle Edmure and secure Riverrun." Catelyn nodded, swallowing hard. "Your father will be proud. The North? My son, do you realize what this means? With Jaime Lannister in our custody, we can bargain for your father's life." He allowed himself a faint, weary smile, even as his injured arm throbbed. Pray the Lannisters see reason. In the days that followed, the news spread like raven wings. The young wolf had captured Jaime Lannister in a brilliant ambush, and, more remarkably, had done so atop a dragon. The rumors varied in color and shape with each telling. Some claimed the dragon was as large as the Red Keep, that it breathed blue flames or soared higher than the Eyrie. Others swore Robb had Targaryen blood or that he made a pact with dark forces. A few even suggested that the old gods blessed the Starks with a weapon to fight the Southern Devils. But the outcome was certain. The Lannisters trembled, the bannermen of the North and Riverlands rallied with renewed vigor, and Robb Stark's name became a legend in its own time. They marched to relieve Riverrun, using the advantage of having Jaime as captive to force the Lannister besiegers into disarray. Without their commander, the gold-cloaked forces stationed around the castle floundered. Many deserted, hearing that a dragon would soon descend upon them. When Robb arrived, Saphrax in tow, the last semblance of Lannister resistance broke. Edmure Tully was freed, and the Tully banner flew proudly once more. The gates opened wide to welcome the Stark host. There, in the great hall of Riverrun, Edmure embraced his nephew, though he looked at the dragon with open-mouthed awe. "By the gods, the tales are true," then Edmure said, drawing back to look at Robb. "I never thought to see the day." Robb merely nodded. "None of us did, uncle. But we must use every advantage if we are to save father." Catelyn approached, standing by her son's side. Her face was drawn, the lines under her eyes deep from worry and the strain of war. But there was something else there, determination. They had won a great victory, but war still loomed. "This changes everything," she said. "But we must be wise. Tywin Lannister won't let this go unanswered." Indeed, the following days were filled with war councils, messages from allies, and frantic attempts by the Lannisters to recover from the blow. Tywin's host to the south proved a looming threat. Yet, more and more northern bannermen poured into Riverrun, rallying behind the rumor of Robb's unstoppable might. The Greyjohn laughed over mugs of ale, proclaiming that they would storm King's Landing itself next. Others urged caution. Saphrax, for all its terror, was still young, not yet the monstrous flame-breather of Targaryen conquests centuries prior. And no dragon is truly invulnerable, especially not to cunning plots or hidden archers with scorpion bolts. Thus, Robb was forced to weave a delicate path. He commanded that Saphrax be well guarded, ensuring that no assassin's arrow found its way to the dragon's heart. Further, he recognized how crucial it was to maintain the sense of unstoppable power. Fear often won battles before a single arrow flew. So, he allowed glimpses of the dragon, let the rumors run wild, but avoided direct confrontation unless necessary. The mere threat of dragonfire would keep many in line. Meanwhile, Jaime Lannister stood in a tower cell of Riverrun under heavy watch. The man's usual arrogance had been tempered, though not extinguished. He sneered at Robb through the bars whenever the young Stark came to see him, but the aura of defeat clung to him like a tattered cloak. Robb offered terms. Exchange Jaime for Lord Eddard Stark, alive and free, along with the safe release of Sansa and Arya. Jaime would not admit whether he believed Tywin would accept, but the bitterness in his eyes suggested he doubted fatherly love would outweigh the older Lannister's pride and warlike instincts. Days turned to weeks as ravens flew back and forth. Tywin's demands were predictable. Release Jaime at once, bend the knee to the Iron Throne, and the North would be granted leniency. Robb sent back a short, pointed refusal. Tywin then threatened to raise the entire might of the Westerlands and crush the Riverlands beneath his heel. Robb responded by parading Saphrax along the ramparts for the Lannister messengers to see. Let Tywin weigh the cost of facing a dragon. Yet, for all the bravado, tension knotted Robb's stomach. He thought of his father languishing in King's Landing, perhaps at the mercy of Joffrey Baratheon and Cersei. Each day that passed was another day Lord Eddard might be executed. Robb lay awake many nights, gazing at the night sky through the window of his chambers in Riverrun, the rustle of the Tully banners in the courtyard below, wondering if the next raven might bring news of Ned Stark's death. In those sleepless hours, he found some solace with Saphrax. The dragon had grown again, now large enough that Robb could ride it in more comfort, though it was still far from the size of the fearsome beasts of old Valyria. Its appetite seemed endless, and the stables had difficulty meeting its demand for fresh meat. Sometimes, Robb flew short distances at dusk, practicing maneuvers outside the castle walls. He discovered Saphrax had an uncanny sense of direction and a lethal grace in the air. Even so, he had to be careful. The archers of the Lannister forces in the field might try to shoot him down, and one unlucky bolt could end all his hopes. Then, at last, a raven arrived bearing an unexpectedly urgent message from Tywin Lannister himself. The tone was stiff, proud, yet laced with hints of unease. Tywin was summoning his entire army to the southeast, near the crossroads. He demanded that the North come forth for a final confrontation. If Robb refused, Tywin threatened to turn his wrath upon the Riverlands tenfold, torching every village, slaughtering every farmer, ensuring famine and despair. The letter concluded with a thinly veiled suggestion. Bring your monstrous creature if you will. The West has its own means of dealing with dragons. A chill scraped down Robb's spine as he read. Could Tywin's confidence stem from the rumored dragon killer Ballisti the Maesters once wrote of? Did he possess some cunning plan to lure Saphrax into a lethal trap? War was never simple, and the Lannisters were as crafty as they came. Robb presented the message to his war council. The Riverlords argued that they couldn't simply ignore Tywin's challenge. If they did, the Lannister host might ravage the Riverlands unchecked. Great John Umber bellowed that they should strike first, unleashing the dragon upon them in a surprise attack. Roose Bolton, ever the quiet voice of caution, suggested they let Tywin ravage the Riverlands a bit to wear down his resources, then attack from a position of strength. Tension mounted, men shouted. Catelyn's gaze shifted worriedly between the conflicting opinions, while Edmure Tully hammered his fist on the table, demanding that they not abandon his homeland to Lannister fury. At length Robb stood. The assembled lords fell silent, waiting for the young Stark to speak. He met each gaze in turn, feeling the weight of command. We cannot abandon the Riverlands, he said, voice steady. But neither can we walk blindly into Tywin's trap. We hold the Kingslayer, a formidable piece. We hold the advantage of the dragon, though we dare not risk it without strategy. Here is what we will do. And so, they devised a plan. Roose Bolton and half the northern host would advance from the north, harassing Tywin's flanks, forcing the Lion to divide his attention. Meanwhile, Robb would lead a smaller force from Riverrun, traveling swiftly. Saphrax would remain concealed at first, hidden in the forests near the road. When Tywin's men engaged Robb's force, the dragon would strike from the skies, sowing terror and disorder. If done correctly, they could break Tywin's lines before he enacted whatever plan he had for defending against dragons. The key was timing and unpredictability. The day of the march dawned gray and chilly. A fine mist clung to the riverlands, typical of autumn's approach. Armored columns filed out from Riverrun, banners snapping. Robb rode at the head, Saphrax walking beside his horse for a time, a spectacle that emboldened the men behind him. Few had seen a living dragon up close, and many stared in awe, whispering prayers or curses. Robb noticed how the men of the Riverlands tried to avoid crossing the dragon's path as if fearful of offending it. In turn, Saphrax carried itself with reptilian dignity, occasionally letting out a low rumble if a curious soldier came too near. Grey Wind trotted at Robb's other side, forming an almost mythic trio: the young Stark, the dire wolf, and the dragon. Their journey took them along the Red Fork, winding through hamlets that had been ravaged by earlier fighting. Smoke still rose from blackened ruins, testifying to the brutality of the war that was creeping across the land. In many places, peasants peered out from behind shuttered windows, their eyes bulging at the sight of the dragon. Some knelt, others cowered. Robb's heart grew heavier with each sight of burned fields and broken homes. It reminded him of why he fought, to spare the North and the Riverlands further devastation. When they drew near the crossroads, scouts reported that Tywin's host was on the move, arrayed in a broad line across gently sloping fields. Their numbers were vast, thousands of infantry, cavalry, and siege engines. Catapults, scorpions, and other war machines dotted the ridges. The bright crimson of Lannister banners dominated the horizon. Robb's war council met one final time before battle. From a ridge among the sparse trees, they watched the Lannisters forming ranks. The entire scene resembled a monstrous tide of gold and red, bristling with spears. Tywin himself was likely at the center, behind a ring of heavy cavalry. Though the Starks and Tullis lacked the same raw numbers, they had cunning and morale. And, of course, Saphrax. Quietly, Robb led the dragon away into the forest that fringed the battlefield. He tied Saphrax to a sturdy tree with a rope, not truly a restraint, but a signal that it should remain until summoned. The beast let out a growl, unsettled by the approach of so many enemies. Robb stroked the ridges along its neck, whispering reassurance. "Wait for me. Wait for my call." In its reptilian stare, he saw a fierce intelligence, an echo of the bond they shared. He prayed the plan would succeed and that neither the dragon nor his men would pay too high a cost. Then Robb rode out to form his lines. Drums and horns sounded. Warriors pounded swords against shields. The tension mounted as the armies slowly advanced on one another. Sunlight broke through the clouds, reflecting off swords and armor in a brilliant mosaic of color, as though the gods themselves were watching. Banners of House Stark and House Tully waved alongside the standards of the Northern Bannermen. The Great John roared curses at the Lannisters from atop his massive warhorse, while Knights of the Vale who joined them under secret treaties gripped lances with white-knuckled determination. Tywin Lannister sent forth a herald under a flag of truce, calling once more for Robb to bend the knee and release Jaime. Robb refused, sending the herald back with a single message: "I have the Kingslayer and a dragon. Best pray, Lord Tywin." With that, the horns blared on both sides. A great cry went up from the Lannister lines, answered by the thunderous shout of the Northern men. Cavalry charged across the churned ground. Arrows blackened the sky. Siege engines rolled forward, launching stones that crashed amid the lines with thunderous impact. Horses screamed, men died. Robb led a wedge of heavy cavalry, smashing into the Lannister front ranks, scattering foemen. Blood spattered his armor. He pushed deeper, Grey Wind tearing into any who blocked their path. War consumed them all, turning the fields into a savage testament of how quickly life could end. The sun rose higher, and still the battle raged. Tywin's lines were deep, and for each yard gained, the Northern men paid in blood. The plan demanded that Robb's smaller force tie up Tywin's main host until the perfect moment. But that moment was proving costly. Arrows whizzed overhead. The ground became slick with mud and gore. The screams of the wounded filled Robb's ears, spurring him onward with grim determination. He knew that if they wavered, if they faltered, Tywin might encircle them entirely. Then, at last, Robb saw the signals from his outriders. The scorpions and catapults were fully engaged against the Northern cavalry in the field. Tywin had committed them all to the front lines, believing that the rumored dragon had been but a bluff or that it would not risk direct confrontation. Now was the time. Breaking away from the melee, Robb galloped toward the forest edge. Sweat and blood stained his face. Gray wind bounded at his side, panting, thick with the carnage of battle. Saphrax sensed their approach, letting out a keening roar that cut through the din. Robb dismounted, heart pounding as he took hold of the rope. With one decisive slash, he freed Saphrax. The dragon spread its wings wide, baring its fangs in challenge. Robb climbed onto the dragon's back, ignoring the exhaustion in his limbs. He gripped the makeshift saddle they had fashioned, feeling the powerful muscles shift beneath him. Saphrax, with a thunderous bound, took to the air. The rush of wind greeted them, and Robb caught his breath as they cleared the treetops rising above the battlefield. From this vantage, the scale of the battle revealed itself fully. Thousands of men locked in combat, swirling plumes of smoke and dust. The Lannister lines extended in a great curve, gleaming in the midday sun. And at their center, near tall banners of the Golden Lion, was Tywin's command. A hush seemed to fall over the battlefield as the black-blue shadow passed overhead. The men of both sides looked up in awe and terror. Robb felt Saphrax draw a deep breath beneath him, fueling the furnace within. Together, they dived upon the Lannister front. Flame poured forth, streaking over the heads of the northern soldiers and crashing down upon the Lannisters. Shrieks of agony ensued. Shields were raised, but to little avail against the inferno. Some knights tried to flee, only to be trampled by their own men. Arrows soared skyward in a desperate attempt to bring the beast down. But Saphrax wove between them, the bond between dragon and rider guiding each movement. The roar of flame, the crash of steel, the screams of burning men. It was a scene of devastation that turned the tide of the battle in heartbeats. In the confusion, Tywin's rank-and-file panicked. The unstoppable dragon had arrived at last, and their famed scorpions and siege engines were pinned to the front, disorganized. Robb directed Saphrax toward those war machines, scorching them with white-hot flame. With splintered and cracked, operators fled in terror. Many were incinerated where they stood. With the Lannister lines reeling, the northern cavalry rallied behind Robb's banner, slamming into pockets of disordered troops. The Great John let out a triumphant war cry. More horns blared, a triumphant echo of the earlier gloom. The tide had shifted decisively. Robb circled overhead, scanning for Tywin. At last, he spotted the distinct shape of the Great Lion banner near the center, with a knot of heavily armored men forming a defensive ring. Tywin himself, grim and furious, directed a last stand. Robb guided Saphrax into a dive, flames licking the corners of the dragon's mouth. But before they could unleash the final strike, a scorpion bolt whistled up from near Tywin's position, narrowly missing Saphrax's wing. Another followed in quick succession, and Robb yanked on the reins, pulling the dragon to the side. They soared in a wide arc, flames rolling in the creature's throat. Tywin had cleverly kept a small group of scorpions in reserve, near his own position. Even so, the range was short and Saphrax was fast. Bolts streaked by, but only one clipped the dragon's flank, sending a spatter of blood into the air. The beast roared in pain, half snarling, half shrieking. Robb's heart lurched. He urged Saphrax to gain height, circling high above where the scorpions struggled to reload. Then, with a furious, vengeful hiss, the dragon descended once more, this time unleashing a torrential stream of fire. Wood and rope and men alike went up in an explosion of bright flame. One scorpion shattered under the heat and force, its iron parts melting. Tywin's guard scattered, and in that chaos, Saphrax landed with a heavy thud, tearing at the ground with its claws. Robb slid off, ignoring the trembling in his legs. He spotted Tywin mounted on a warhorse, face like stone, eyes blazing with hatred. Behind him, a cluster of Lannister knights formed up. The ground was scorched black in places, strewn with bodies. The stench was nearly overwhelming. But Tywin Lannister did not flee. He glared at Robb as though seeing an upstart child who dared to defy a king's greatest lord. Robb's voice carried across the small clearing formed by the Ring of Destruction. "Throw down your sword, Lord Tywin. The day is lost." Tywin's cold gaze flicked to the wounded dragon, which growled and shifted behind Robb. Then back to Robb's battered armor, spattered with gore. "You presume to order me, boy?" Tywin's voice cut the air like a lash. "I do not yield to illusions of power." A beast at your side does not make you a king. Robb stiffened. I do not seek a throne, only justice. Your son is my prisoner. Yields can be offered. Tywin's lip curled. It is you who should yield. My riders are not far. You've won a skirmish, Stark. But wars are not won in a single day. I'll drown your north in blood if you... Saffrax roared, cutting off Tywin's threats. Flames licked around its jaws, and the horse beneath Tywin danced nervously. Robb saw the older man's hands tighten on the reins. Tywin might be fearless, but his mount was not. The ring of gold-cloaked knights shifted uneasily. There was no time for a protracted negotiation. The northern infantry closed in from behind Tywin, and horns sounded anew, announcing that the Lannister lines had fully broken. Some knights threw down their weapons, others fled. Tywin's final redoubt was crumbling. Robb advanced, sword in hand. Tywin's eyes flicked between the dragon and the mass of northern soldiers encircling him. Pride warred with survival. In the end, he gave one last sneer and flung his sword to the ground. The golden blade landed with a dull thud. His knights followed suit, relinquishing their arms. A thunderous cheer erupted from the northern ranks. Men pounded their shields, chanting, "Stark! Stark! Stark!" The Riverlanders joined, weeping in relief that Tywin Lannister, the dreaded lion, had surrendered. Robb stood amidst the swirl of victory, breathing hard, fighting the swirl of emotions in his chest. He had forced Tywin Lannister to yield, captured Jaime, broken the siege of Riverrun, and he had done it all with the help of a dragon. In that moment, as the crowd's roar surrounded them, Robb's gaze fell upon Saffrax. The dragon's side bled from that single bolt, yet it stood proudly, its wings partially folded, flames still smoldering along its jaws. The bond they shared flared, and Robb felt a pang of gratitude so strong it nearly brought tears. Had the old gods truly blessed him, or had chance placed that egg in the crypts of Winterfell? He did not know, but in the hush that followed, one truth burned in his mind as surely as dragonfire. House Stark would no longer bow, no longer cower. They would be the shield of the North, the vengeance for old wrongs, and the protectors of their own. They gathered the prisoners under heavy guard, taking Tywin's sword and armor. Robb ordered a field surgeon to tend to the dragon's wound, at least superficially, though few had experience with such a creature. Saffrax did not protest, but huffed and snapped whenever a stranger came too close, eventually allowing only Robb and Grey Wind near enough for the field dressings. That evening, a makeshift camp was erected on the battlefield. Fires dotted the plain where men roasted meager rations, celebrating in hushed voices, exhausted from the day's carnage. The Lannister prisoners were bound, disarmed, and surrounded by northern sentries. Tywin sat in his own tent, guarded by a double ring of loyal men. He spoke to no one, face carved from stone. None dared approach the lion, for fear of his tongue if not his claws. Robb stood by Saffrax near a blazing fire, pressing a poultice to the dragon's side. A few men hovered nearby, half curious, half cautious, but they gave the pair a wide berth. The battered sky above glimmered with the first hints of stars. Smoke drifted across the field from dying pyres. The memory of the day's destruction weighed heavily on Robb's shoulders. This was victory, but war itself is no triumph. Still, he thought of his father. With both Tywin and Jaime captive, he could negotiate from a position of overwhelming strength. King Joffrey would have no choice but to release Eddard Stark. He prayed the boy king had not already done the unspeakable. Soft footsteps approached. Catelyn stood behind him, cloak drawn tight against the night's chill. The flickering firelight accentuated the concern etched into her features. "The men sing your praises tonight," she said quietly, voice tinted with a mother's protective worry. "They call you the Dragon Wolf. They say the Lannisters have lost their teeth. Yet, I see no joy in your eyes." Robb met her gaze, lowering his hand from Saffrax's wound. "I rejoice that we've all but won. I rejoice that father may yet be returned to us. But I cannot forget the price in blood. Nor can I ignore the next storm. The Iron Throne will not sit idle while we hold Tywin and Jaime. More battles may come. Perhaps all of Westeros will turn upon us, seeing a threat in this dragon. Catelyn touched his shoulder, gentle yet firm. Then we will face them together. The North stands with you, my son. The Riverlands stand with you. And if this war must be fought to free Lord Eddard, so be it. Robb nodded, releasing a slow breath. He looked up at the stars. It's strange, he murmured. To ride a dragon, to wield that power. Sometimes it does not feel real. But I vowed to the old gods that I would save father. This is the path they gave me. Catelyn allowed a faint smile. They say the Starks are tied to the old magic. Perhaps the land itself willed you to find that egg. Let the tales grow. Let them fear the dragon wolf. If it brings us peace and freedom, maybe that is enough. Grey wind pressed close, and Saffrax turned its long neck to nuzzle Robb's arm, the beast's hot breath ruffling the boy's hair. In that small gesture, Robb found something like comfort. War tested him, changed him, and he found that the only path forward was to embrace the role fate had thrust upon him. The North had rarely sought conquest, but it would defend itself with all the fury of winter. Across the field the men began to settle, silence descending with the night. Fires burned low, watchmen paced, and in the distance one could hear the soft murmur of wind through the tall grasses. If one listened closely, it almost sounded like a whisper, a reminder of what had happened here and what might come next. Robb stroked Saffrax's scales, gazing into the flames. Tomorrow they would begin negotiations, sending ravens to King's Landing, demanding the release of Lord Eddard and the Stark girls. Tomorrow the realm would learn that Tywin Lannister had knelt before the young wolf and his dragon. Tomorrow the world would change, for the illusions of southern supremacy would be singed by northern fire. In that quiet moment, as the dragon's rhythmic breathing mingled with the hush of the night, Robb allowed himself a fleeting hope that the war might end soon and that House Stark, united in both family and dire wolf and dragon, would endure. Yet, destiny rarely yields so easily, and the struggles of kings and lords are seldom resolved without deeper trials. Forces stirred in other corners of Westeros, at Dragonstone, at Highgarden, in the Iron Islands. Ambition and fear would brew new conflicts, and some would hunger for the power the Starks now wielded. But for this night, at least, victory belonged to the North. A hush spread across the campsite, the hush of thousands of exhausted soldiers, the hush of a land that had witnessed the impossible made real again. And within that hush, a single ember glowed, the ember of a new age, in which the children of winter soared on dragon wings and the howling of a direwolf heralded the flames of change. Dawn broke across a silent plain that had seen too much blood. Wisps of morning mist clung to the churned ground, curling around the broken remnants of siege engines and the scattered dead. The hush that hovered over the campsite was uneasy, as though the land itself still reeled from the violence visited upon it. Tents sagged under the weight of dew, and a few tired sentries stamped their feet against the lingering cold. Farther off, at the edges of the makeshift encampment, guards patrolled among the bound Lannister prisoners with watchful eyes. Some of those captives, too weary for anger, leaned against one another for whatever warmth they could find in the chill dawn. Robb Stark stood alone near the dying embers of a large campfire, a thread of smoke coiling into the damp air. He watched the first fingers of sunlight stretch across the horizon. His breathing was steady, but his mind whirled with the magnitude of what lay before him. Grey wind lay at his feet, head on his paws, ears twitching whenever a guard passed. Near them, Saffrax dozed in a great mound of dark scales and folded wings, muzzle resting on taloned forelimbs. A rough poultice of herbs and bandages clung to the dragon's flank, staining the cloth with dark blood. The scorpion bolt that had grazed Saffrax the previous day left a painful wound, yet the dragon's natural resilience was startling. Already, the bleeding had slowed, and the creature had eaten well in the night. No standard leech or maester's remedy existed for dragons. Robb relied on the whispered advice of old herbalists among his men, along with his own instincts. The wound would heal, but caution was paramount. He found his thoughts drifting to the day's tasks. A parley awaited, a final negotiation with Lord Tywin Lannister, now prisoner, and the dispatch of ravens to King's Landing. The sun, with its golden shafts of light, illuminated a field that was victory's stage, but the cost was plain. Everywhere Robb looked, he saw men nursing wounds, burying comrades, or grimly standing guard. Northern banners still fluttered in the faint breeze, the direwolf of House Stark, the sunburst of Karstark, the flayed man of Bolton, the roaring bear of Mormont, and more. Mixed among them were the trout of the Tullus and the rare falcon of the Vale, representing the knights who had quietly thrown in their lot with the young wolf. And here, overshadowing all, lay the black-blue shape of Saphrax, the living myth that had carried them to such a staggering triumph. He felt a presence behind him and turned to see his mother. Catelyn Stark approached with careful steps, her cloak pulled tight around her shoulders. Her face was lined with fatigue, yet the flicker of relief in her eyes remained. So much had changed since the day she arrived at her son's war camp, still hopeful that diplomacy might save Eddard Stark from the Lannisters' clutches. Now they had Tywin himself in bonds, along with Jaime, but Ned was still far away, trapped under the Iron Throne's shadow. "Have you slept?" she asked softly, coming to stand beside him. She glanced at Grey Wind, who stirred at her approach, but relaxed at the scent he knew so well. "Some," Robb said. His voice felt raw, as though from shouting commands all night. "I dreamed of father. And then I woke." Her expression softened, and she reached out to touch his shoulder. "We've won a mighty victory. Soon we'll force them to release him. Tywin cannot refuse forever, not while the Kingslayer is in our power. Not after this." Robb nodded, though he did not entirely believe that Tywin's pride would bend easily. "I worry about King Joffrey," he said. "He's cruel, and no one truly restrains him but his mother. If he thinks to make an example of father—" He left the thought unfinished, though the dread lingered in the space between them. Catelyn's jaw set. "We hold Tywin Lannister. That is no small thing. He might be many things, but he is a man who values the legacy of House Lannister above all else. Sacrificing Jaime, that might be unthinkable to him." She paused, glancing at the dragon's flank. Saphrax shifted slightly in sleep. "Word of your bond with this beast is spread. The entire realm is in awe and in fear. Whatever cunning Tywin possesses, I doubt he'll risk open defiance now that his scorpions and catapults lie in splinters." Robb tried to be comforted by her words. "I hope you are right." He inhaled sharply, stepping away from the smoldering fire. "We should speak with him. The longer we wait, the more time we give King's Landing to plan." She fell into step beside him, and Grey Wind padded along as well, yawning and baring fangs still stained from the previous day's carnage. The path through the camp was lined with men stirring to their morning duties. Some knelt to sharpen swords, others hammered out dents in battered shields, while a few cooks ladled thin stew from steaming pots. All rose or bowed their heads respectfully when Robb passed. Some of them dared to smile, pride in their eyes, for they had stood against the great Tywin Lannister and prevailed. And they had done so following the young wolf, a boy, many had called him, yet that boy had soared on dragon wings into the thick of battle. They reached a ring of guards standing before a large canvas tent. The tent was simple but reinforced with thick ropes placed away from the general clamor of camp. Robb's men bowed. One of them, a tall northerner with the look of a glover, gestured to a pair of carefully stacked swords by the entrance. "Lord Tywin is within, my lord," the guard said. "Chained at the wrists, but we left him otherwise unhurt." "Just as you ordered." Robb nodded and pushed aside the tent flap. Grey Wind slipped in silently behind him, though Catelyn waited at the threshold for Robb's signal that it was safe. Inside, the air smelled of canvas and stale torches. Tywin Lannister sat on a wooden stool, his wrists secured with iron manacles, a length of chain linking them to a metal stake hammered into the ground. He wore no fine silks or gilded armor now, they had stripped him of that for safekeeping. His hair, once meticulously groomed, lay disheveled, and a bruise darkened the side of his temple. Yet his posture remained proud, spine straight, chin lifted. Two silent guards hovered at the corners, swords at EIR hips. Tywin's cold green eyes flicked to Robb. "My host at last," he said, voice dry as old parchment. "Such courtesy to keep a guest waiting." Robb kept his face impassive. "My men have been preparing the ground for the burials." That took precedence over lavish comforts for House Lannister. Tywin's lip curled. A commendable effort. He did not elaborate, nor did Robb expect him to. Tywin Lannister had a reputation, stoic, calculating, unyielding. A caged lion might bristle, but it did not lose its nature. Robb stepped forward, the chain clinking slightly as Tywin shifted. Grey Wind prowled behind Robb, sniffing at the corners, then turned baleful eyes on the prisoner. "I trust you know why I've come," Robb said evenly, crossing his arms. "We have terms to discuss. As of now, both you and your son Jaime are at my mercy." Tywin gave a curt nod, a muscle in his jaw twitching. "You want your father freed. You want your sisters. I know the list of demands. But if you think the capital will bend because I've been so careless as to lose a battle—" "You lost more than a battle," Robb interjected. "You lost command of the war. And if you think the crown will ignore my host and my dragon." At that, Tywin's eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes, your dragon." A most unexpected turn. No one in the Seven Kingdoms expected to see such a thing again. And yet here we are. Robb let a heartbeat pass. A new age is upon us, Lord Tywin. With you and Jaime both in my hands, I hold the advantage. I want an immediate exchange. Lord Eddard Stark, Sansa Stark, and Arya Stark returned safely to me. In addition, you will withdraw all your forces from the Riverlands and the Westerlands border with the north, returning to Casterly Rock. Only then will I consider releasing Jaime, and only after my father and sisters are secure. Tywin let out a soft exhale, almost a scoff. You imagine I can snap my fingers and command the Boy King to kneel? Joffrey's whims are not so easily guided. Nor does my capture vacate the Lannister seat of power. House Lannister still has many resources, many allies. And if you intend to trade me like a token, you may find your father's head on a spike. Robb felt his blood run cold. Grey Wind let out a low rumble as though sensing the spike in tension. But he refused to show Tywin any wavering. You forget that I hold Jaime as well. Do you believe King Joffrey would risk the heir to House Lannister? Will your own men remain loyal if the next Lord of the Rock is left to rot or, worse, is executed? I know what your name means to you. If you value Jaime's life, you'll ensure my father and sisters remain unharmed. Tywin studied him for a long moment. The corners of his mouth tightened, forming deep lines. You've learned well, boy. Ned Stark would be proud of how far from mercy you've strayed. Fury flared in Robb's chest, but he kept it in check. I learned from you and your son, as well as from the heads on spikes decorating the walls of King's Landing. If I must be merciless to protect my family, so be it. For a moment, no one spoke. Outside, a faint breeze stirred the canvas. Tywin's gaze slid to Grey Wind, who stared back unblinking, lips drawn back from sharp teeth. Finally, Tywin said, You have my attention. Draft your terms. Send them to King's Landing. The Queen will have her say. The King will have his. If they are wise, they will see reason. The realm hardly wishes to face Dragonfire again. You will send a letter as well, Robb replied, confirming that you consider these terms fair and urging your family to cooperate. Tywin's upper lip twitched, but he nodded. For Jaime's sake, I will. But whether it accomplishes anything, that is another question. With that, Robb stepped back. I'll have a maester bring parchment. And, Lord Tywin, remember this, if any harm befalls my father or my sisters, I'll let the dragon burn King's Landing to the ground. A flicker of something crossed Tywin's face, unease or perhaps frustration at the boy he had dismissed now speaking to him as an equal. Understood. Robb exited the tent, Grey Wind padding at his heels. Outside, Catelyn waited, arms folded, her face etched with concern. He signaled the guards to remain vigilant, then led her a short distance away so they could speak privately. A cluster of men from House Mallister, House Manderly, and the Karstarks paused in their labors nearby, acknowledging their lord with a tilt of the head, then resumed gathering broken weapons to be melted down or repaired. Will Tywin cooperate? Catelyn asked. I believe he will try, Robb said, if only to protect Jaime. But whether King Joffrey or Queen Cersei will listen is another matter. We have to assume they'll resist or perhaps attempt something underhanded. Father remains in mortal danger. Catelyn's mouth pressed into a thin line. Then what do we do? Draft the letters. Make it clear we have Tywin and Jaime. Threaten total war if a hair on father's head is harmed. Perhaps that will be enough. And if it isn't? Robb's gaze lifted to the horizon where the lingering smoke from the battlefield still smudged the sky. Then we force the issue. If Joffrey refuses, I'll march south again. And this time, I won't stop until the Red Keep is at my feet. He sounded so certain, yet beneath it all lay a trembling coil of dread. Winning a pitched field battle was one thing, storming King's Landing was another. The city's walls were formidable, and though Saffrax was an astonishing weapon, Robb had no illusions that a single dragon, especially a young one, could easily reduce those ancient defenses. Yet the threat might be enough to cow the Lannisters. Especially if the city dreaded the repeated blasts of Dragonfire. Catelyn looked at him, eyes laden with sorrow. Let us hope it does not come to that. They parted, with Robb heading to meet Maester Vyman, a slender, gray-haired man from Riverrun who waited in another section of the camp. They worked together on the letters all morning, one addressed to King Joffrey and the Queen Regent, another specifically to the small council, and a third to be taken by a Lannister courier bearing Tywin's own words. Robb was blunt in these messages, laying out that both Tywin and Jaime were captive and that any retaliation would be met with Dragonfire. He demanded the immediate release of Eddard Stark and his daughters, Sansa and Arya, unharmed and unhostaged. Tywin penned a short letter of his own under guard. Robb read it, found it stiff and formal but containing the crucial line, Lord Tywin Lannister of Casterly Rock, advised the crown to heed Lord Stark's proposal lest the costs grow too great. It might not be a glowing endorsement, but it was something. Once the missives were sealed with wax, Robb summoned a small group of men for the courier's escort. They would travel south under a white banner, hopefully reaching King's Landing within a week if luck and the roads were kind. That afternoon, the camp buzzed with preparations to move again. Although they had set up near the site of the battle, they could not remain indefinitely. Already, crows circled overhead in grim patterns, and more Lannister stragglers might lurk in the vicinity. Some of Robb's allied lords wished to fortify the region, others urged returning to Riverrun. Edmure Tully wanted to ensure the Riverlands were fully cleared of enemy forces. The Great John clamored to pursue any scattered Lannister holdouts, believing they should crush them utterly and send the survivors fleeing west. But Robb's priority was his father. So, with Catelyn's support and a consensus from his bannermen, he planned a careful course. They would regroup at Riverrun first to see how the negotiations fared. Meanwhile, Roose Bolton was tasked with leading a contingent northward, ensuring the highways were safe and that no roving bands of Lannister outriders threatened the main host from behind. Robb trusted Bolton little, but the man's cunning was useful. He doubted even Tywin's most ruthless captains would find easy prey in Roose Bolton's path. By the following dawn, the Stark-Tully army broke camp. Robb rode at the front, Saphrax walking on foot beside him. The dragon's flank was still healing, and Robb saw no reason to stress the wound by forcing flight unless necessary. Men parted like water around the creature, giving it a wide berth, but the presence of the beast served as a potent symbol of their strength. Tywin and Jaime traveled in separate prison wagons, each heavily guarded. Neither father nor son was permitted to speak freely with each other. The memory of Jaime's capture in the Whispering would still pulsed in the minds of the men, and few among them desired any chance for the Kingslayer's escape. The march took several days. Even unopposed, an army of that size did not travel swiftly. They passed fields left fallow, villages half-burnt or abandoned, evidence of the war's earlier ravages. The men grew quiet at the sight of scorched farmland, where skeletons of livestock lay in the open, picked clean by carrion birds. It reminded them of the stakes at hand. The Riverlands had suffered enough. Each step of the horse seemed to weigh heavier on Robb's soul. He had emerged from the north to rescue his father and protect these lands, yet sometimes it felt as though all he brought was another wave of bloodshed. But word of Tywin's defeat had traveled ahead of them, and in every village, crowds emerged to gawk, to cheer, or to simply stare in wonder at the column of weary victors, the battered wagons of prisoners, and the monstrous shape of the dragon. A hush would fall when Saphrax drew near, and more than once, a frightened child would begin to cry. Robb tried to soften the spectacle, sometimes encouraging Saphrax to remain behind or take a path away from the main thoroughfare. Yet it was impossible to hide a dragon so large. The realm might fear them, but fear was a double-edged sword. For now, it kept smaller pockets of resistance at bay. They reached Riverrun on a brisk, cloudy morning. Edmure Tully, riding beside Robb, breathed an audible sigh of relief as the fortress's red walls and tower rose above the confluence of rivers. He spurred his horse ahead to consult with the gate guard. Trumpets sounded to welcome them, though the air was somber, given how many wounded and exhausted soldiers trudged in the wake of the banners. Inside the walls, the courtyard bustled with river lords who had remained behind, along with a throng of small folk who rushed to greet loved ones returning from the battle. The mood was a subdued celebration, overshadowed by grief for the fallen. Robb ordered the gates locked behind the supply wagons, ensuring Tywin and Jaime were secured in Riverrun's sturdiest cells. He took no risks. Over the next week, life in Riverrun turned into a tense vigil. Each day, outriders returned with fragments of news, the Lannisters in disarray, with many of Tywin's loyal men deserting or retreating to the west. Refugees trickled in, telling of half-abandoned castles, sporadic raids, or roving brigands. The highways in the Riverlands had grown dangerous as common criminals used the chaos of war to plunder. Robb dispatched patrols to secure trade routes and gather supplies for the growing army. Many wounded required constant care, and the castle's maester toiled day and night in the infirmary. Saphrax prowled the courtyard or perched along the outer walls. Archers had to be instructed not to panic whenever the dragon soared overhead. As the days stretched on without a raven from King's Landing, restlessness grew among the northern lords. Great John Umber demanded they keep pressing south until the Iron Throne itself was forced to yield. Rickard Karstark, who burned with personal hatred for the Lannisters over the death of his sons, seconded the idea. The river lords were more cautious. Some feared if Robb marched away, pockets of resistance might reignite in the Riverlands. Others pointed out that if King's Landing were to kill Ned Stark in defiance, the Northmen might destroy the city, but that would hardly bring Eddard back. Catelyn spent her hours moving quietly through the castle, speaking reason where she could, reminding them that war, not caution, had nearly cost Lord Stark his head already. Every morning, Robb rose before sunrise, slipping into the quiet courtyard. Saphrax often slept near the gatehouse, curled like a gargantuan cat, exhaling plumes of hot breath. Sometimes Robb would climb atop the dragon's back and they would circle the skies above the Trident rivers. These dawn flights cleared his mind, even if only for a short while. The wind ruffled his hair, the land spread below like a painted tapestry, and the rhythmic beat of Saphrax's wings was a lullaby of freedom from the burden of leadership. Yet always he had to return. Duty awaited him. It was on a fog-shrouded morning, nearly 2 weeks after the final defeat of Tywin in the field, that a raven finally arrived. Robb was in the Great Hall, conferring with Edmure Tully about distribution of grain to outlying villages. When Maester Vyman entered, scroll in hand, expression grave. The hall stilled. Robb stepped away from the table to meet the Maester, who offered the sealed parchment with trembling fingers. "It bears the seal of the hand," Vyman said quietly, the lines around his eyes tense. "A new hand, it seems." Robb took the scroll and broke the wax. Indeed, the seal depicted a mockingbird, the sigil of Peter Baelish, if rumor spoke true. Robb's stomach tightened. He glanced up to see Catelyn entering the hall with measured steps, worry etched into her features. Lords around them watched in near silence as Robb read. To Robb Stark, called the young wolf, Warden of the North, I write with the knowledge and authority bestowed upon me as Hand of the King. Your demands have been received, and the Crown offers a parley to resolve the matter of Lord Eddard Stark's captivity. His lordship is currently imprisoned on charges of treason against the Crown, as your father, Lord Tywin Lannister, once was rumored to support. However, it is the wish of King Joffrey that peace be restored to the realm, and that the misfortunes of war be resolved without further bloodshed. Her Grace the Queen Regent and I stand ready to negotiate terms for Lord Eddard's release, and to that end, you are summoned to attend King's Landing with a small retinue under safe conduct. King Joffrey will offer mercy upon your good behavior, and in return, you will yield Lord Tywin Lannister to us forthwith. The matter of Ser Jaime Lannister remains separate and may be addressed during the negotiations. Furthermore, if the rumors of a dragon are to be believed, the Crown invites you to demonstrate your loyalty by leaving such a beast at a neutral location so as not to threaten the seat of His Majesty. Signed, Peter Baelish, Hand of the King, acting on behalf of His Grace King Joffrey Baratheon. Robb read the letter twice, a slow burn of anger igniting in his chest. The arrogance, the condescension, it was all there in neat lines. It was also plain that the new hand, Peter Baelish, was no fool. He likely recognized that King's Landing was in no position to defend itself from a dragon onslaught, yet he couched that fear in haughty terms. Summoned to attend King's Landing. Summoned to yield Tywin Lannister. As if Robb would willingly place himself in the heart of the city, surrounded by enemies, armed only with a promise of safe conduct. He passed the scroll to his mother, who skimmed it. Catelyn's lips pressed together. They claim to want peace, yet they insist you hand over Tywin first. They do not even mention your sisters. Robb pointed to the second paragraph. They talk of negotiations. That means they plan to bargain Ned Stark's life in exchange for Tywin, perhaps Jaime. But they make no guarantee of anything, no direct mention of Sansa or Arya. If we deliver Tywin to them, we lose our most valuable card. We would be fools to do so without immediate release of father and my sisters. Around them, the lords gathered, reading the expression on Robb's face. The great Jon spat on the floor. The gall of them, summoning you like some petty vassal. Edmure scowled. You cannot trust Baelish or Cersei. They might betray you the moment you set foot inside the city. Several nodded. Roose Bolton's cool voice drifted from the edge of the hall. A trap, my lord. They cannot be so bold as to kill you openly. Yet there are subtler methods, poison, an accident on the road, the city guard turning on you. Our entire cause would shatter if you were taken. Robb's eyes swept the hall, finding the faces of those who had fought and bled for him. Ser Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, stood with arms folded, face shadowed by concern. Vardy's Aegon of the Vale, who had come quietly to offer aid, toyed with the hilt of his sword. Across from them, a cluster of northern warriors listened intently. They all waited for Robb to speak to decide how to answer this letter. He turned to Caitlin. "What do you think, Mother?" She hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering her voice so only Robb and a few near them could hear. "I think they are desperate. Our victory has shaken them. They do not trust their walls to keep out a dragon. So they craft an invitation that would place you in their power. Your father's life is the lure. If it were me alone, I would refuse outright." But her voice caught. "Eddard's life hangs in the balance. And your sister's. Perhaps we can force better terms. A neutral site. Or perhaps demand they send Ned to us before we release Tywin. Something that avoids the trap." Robb exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest making each breath tight. "A neutral site. That might work. Where?" They conferred swiftly, names tossed around. Harrenhal, the Crossroads Inn, even Storm's End. But each location raised concerns. Some were too close to Lannister-held lands, others too isolated, and some were in the path of other warbands. Finally, Caitlin proposed the twins' seat of House Frey, though that name drew grimaces from many. Walder Frey was not well loved, but the castle was strategically located. Another possibility was Moat Cailin, near the border of the north, but that would be a long journey for the crown. They had to choose carefully. Amid the debate, Roose Bolton cleared his throat. "There is a simpler solution, my lord. We march on King's Landing with the host we have and with your dragon, and we encircle the city. They will release Eddard Stark rather than face your wrath. They have no father or brother to bargain with. Their only leverage is your father's life. But confronted with immediate, overwhelming force, they may yield without a protracted siege." Murmurs of agreement spread among the more aggressive lords. The Great John practically grinned at the notion. Others looked uneasy. A siege meant suffering for the small folk in King's Landing, potential for disease, and the possibility that the crown might harm Eddard Stark out of spite or desperation. Siege warfare was rarely clean, especially with a city as large and populous as the capital. Robb weighed the arguments, tension coiling in his chest. Finally, he raised a hand to silence the talk. "We will respond with a demand for a neutral meeting place. I will not ride into the lion's den at their command. Our terms stand. Eddard Stark and my sisters must be freed before Tywin is released to them. If they refuse, we march. If they threaten my father, we march. And if they harm him, we burn their city." The final words came out cold and resolute, sending a chill through the hall. A storm of activity followed. Maester Vyman prepared a letter to Peter Baelish, refuting the idea of traveling to King's Landing and proposing instead that the exchange occur at the Twins. Robb demanded that Eddard Stark be delivered there under safe escort along with the Stark girls. Only upon seeing them safely transferred to his care would he release Tywin. As for Jaime, Robb decided to keep that matter separate for the moment. Trading Tywin was dangerous enough, letting go of both Lannisters would forfeit all leverage. Messengers rode off again, stirring the realm's rumor mill anew. Each passing day without a reply from King's Landing gnawed at Robb's nerves. He pushed himself to stay busy, attending councils, reorganizing his forces, and when possible, taking to the skies with Saffrax for reconnaissance flights over the Riverlands. He spotted abandoned hamlets, charred fields, pockets of bandits lurking in half-toppled barns. More than once, the mere sight of the dragon overhead drove these outlaws to scatter. Robb dispatched small groups to restore order where they could. Meanwhile, Tywin Lannister languished in Riverrun's dungeons, each day growing more sour and silent. Jaime remained sullen in his own cell. They were both given enough food and water, but no freedom, no opportunity to conspire. The men said Tywin spent hours simply staring at the wall while Jaime paced endlessly, exchanging barbs with his guards. Robb considered attempting to glean strategic information from them, but it became clear neither father nor son would betray House Lannister's secrets. So they remained locked away, helpless to watch the world turn without them. At length, nearly another fortnight later, a new raven arrived, this time bearing not only Peter Baelish's Mockingbird seal, but also the royal seal of King Joffrey. Robb's war council gathered in the Great Hall again. Night had fallen, and torches cast flickering shadows across old tapestries. Robb stood at the head of the table, Saffrax curled outside in the courtyard, occasionally letting out a low, rumbling growl that seemed to echo through the castle walls. Every man in that hall waited with bated breath as Maester Vyman unfurled the scroll and read aloud. To Robb Stark, called the Young Wolf, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, the Crown acknowledges your desire for a neutral meeting place. In the interests of peace, King Joffrey agrees to parley at the Twins. However, certain provisions must be met. First, you shall come with a small retinue, not exceeding 100 men, and you will bring Lord Tywin Lannister with you as a guest under your protection. King Joffrey will likewise bring Lord Eddard Stark and the Lady Sansa, but the Lady Arya remains missing, presumed lost in the disturbances at King's Landing. The Crown regrets that her whereabouts are unknown and no assurances can be made of her safety. Nevertheless, Eddard Stark and Sansa Stark will be presented at the twins for negotiation. Second, no dragon is to be brought within 20 leagues of the twins. This is a condition for the safety of King Joffrey, the Queen Regent, and all present. Should you or your allies be found in breach of these conditions, the parley is void. Third, on the successful conclusion of these talks, Lord Tywin Lannister shall be released, and Eddard Stark, along with Sansa Stark, shall be free to return to your custody. Failure to comply will result in the immediate revocation of King Joffrey's clemency, and Lord Eddard Stark's life will be forfeit. Signed in the light of the Seven, King Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name, with the counsel of Peter Baelish, Hand of the King. A hush fell as the final words echoed in the hall. Robb's pulse hammered, and a cold fury brewed in his chest. The letter reeked of manipulation. Arya was missing. Was that true, or simply a ploy? They dared to forbid him from bringing Saffrax within 20 leagues. It was as if they tried to declaw him. And yet, they offered a direct exchange. Eddard and Sansa for Tywin. A parley at the twins, something approaching middle ground. Some part of him felt relieved that they had not insisted on King's Landing, yet the conditions rankled. If the Lannisters arrived in force, or if Walder Frey turned his coat, Robb would be vulnerable. The memory of crossing the twins under uneasy terms still pained him. He looked around at the gathered lords. Tension marred every brow. Rickard Karstark glowered. The Greyjohn's face twisted in rage, and Edmure chewed his lip in uncertainty. Catelyn's gaze met Robb's, searching for some sign of calm. He pressed the heel of his hand against the table's edge, trying to steady himself. He spoke, voice low. They claim Arya is lost. We have no proof. For all we know, they hold her hidden away, or she has escaped. But they offer Father and Sansa if we yield Tywin. Roose Bolton's soft voice rose. And they demand you leave your dragon behind. That is no small request. The Greatjon growled agreement. They want to face us with no advantage. We might as well hand them the sword to cut our own throats. Catelyn stepped forward. Yet we must consider Eddard's life. If they see that we bring the dragon, or if we approach the twins with the entire army, they may cry treachery. They could kill Eddard before we can intervene. It's exactly the trap they want. Robb stood silent, wrestling with conflicting urges. He yearned to bring Saffrax, to ensure no trickery threatened his father. But the letter was explicit, and if Joffrey or Cersei believed themselves in danger, who knew what they might do? Then again, traveling without the dragon placed Robb at tremendous risk. Walder Frey was unpredictable. Joffrey and Cersei were cunning. Could they have prepared some dreadful snare? In the end, he exhaled and said, "We cannot ignore this. We must see to Father's safety." His gaze flicked to the Greatjon. "We will not arrive unguarded. 100 men is no trifling amount, especially if they are well chosen. I will bring the best knights and lords among us. The rest of our host will remain nearby, well outside 20 leagues, but close enough to move if needed. Saffrax will remain with the main host. If the Lannisters betray us and harm Father or try to seize me, I will have signaled my men. They can ride within days, and the dragon can overtake them in half that time." Catelyn frowned. "You would trust Walder Frey to host this parley fairly?" "We have no choice," Robb said grimly. "The twins are the designated place. And Frey is too cunning to alienate us by betraying the Starks in plain sight, especially while we have half the realm's prisoners. He knows we hold Tywin, and if Walder Frey has any sense, he will see that the Lannisters' position is not secure. He gains nothing by siding with them against me, not openly. But we must remain vigilant." So it was settled. Letters were drafted, plans set in motion. Robb would bring Tywin in chains, escorted by a hand-picked retinue. Jaime would remain at Riverrun under heavy guard. If treachery occurred, the Lannisters would know their prized knight would face retribution. Meanwhile, the largest portion of Robb's forces would wait, commanded by Roose Bolton and Edmure Tully. Saffrax would remain with them. They would stay just outside the boundary of the Lannisters' edict, so if anything went amiss, the dragon could be summoned at once. Those days before the fateful journey felt both too short and too long. Robb spent hours reviewing strategies, training with sword and spear, keeping a level head. Caitlin quietly prepared for the moment she might see her husband again, mind churning with fears and hopes. Tywin, informed of the plan, betrayed little emotion. "If this yields me my freedom, so be it," he said, though his eyes gleamed with the cold cunning of a man who had not given up on shaping events to his advantage. The men whispered that perhaps Tywin planned to orchestrate something once he was away from Riverrun's walls. At last, the day arrived. A chill wind swept the courtyard as Robb mounted his horse. He wore his best armor, the plates newly polished, the direwolf sigil on his surcoat. Grey Wind trotted beside him, a silent sentinel. The retinue formed up, 100 swords, including such stalwarts as the great Jon, Rickard Karstark, and many knights chosen for skill and loyalty. Caitlin would ride with them, for she would not be parted from the chance to see Eddard. Tywin Lannister emerged from the dungeons, hands bound but perched atop a sturdy brown gelding. Guards flanked him on both sides, swords at the ready. The rest of the host, several thousand strong, stood to watch them depart, Saffrax among them, the dragon's eyes flicking with restless anxiety. Robb paused near the beast, placing a hand on its scaled neck. Saffrax let out a low growl, pressing its muzzle to Robb's breastplate as though sensing the separation. Robb felt a surge of warmth and gratitude. "Stay with them," he murmured, meeting the dragon's pale eyes. "I will summon you if we need you." A wisp of smoke curled from Saffrax's nostrils. The creature did not speak, but Robb felt the bond stir. The moment lingered, fleeting yet powerful. Then he turned, spurred his horse, and led the column out the gates. Trumpets sounded a solemn farewell. They rode north along the Red Fork, leaving Riverrun behind, passing the burned husks of villages now silent under the bleak autumn sky. The pace was brisk, for time was precious. With each day's march, the tension built. Tywin remained stoic, barely speaking except to inquire about rest stops or to have his restraints loosened for the sake of circulation. At night, they camped in tight formation, watch fires glowing all around. Stories and rumors circulated among the men. Some believed King Joffrey would never give up Eddard Stark. Others hoped the Boy King's fear of dragons would force compliance. Rain pelted them one afternoon, soaking through cloaks and stirring mud along the roads. The smell of wet earth clung to them. Robb found himself riding in silence next to Caitlin, who stared at the horizon with an expression unreadable and taut. He wanted to offer comfort, but words felt hollow. He simply placed a hand over hers on the reins for a moment. She gave him a faint, tired smile. On the 5th day, they approached the broad, murky waters of the Green Fork. The twins loomed beyond. 2 identical stone keeps towering on opposite sides of the river, joined by a massive fortified bridge that was House Frey's lifeblood. Old Walder Frey's seat. The banner of the twins, a pair of gray towers on a blue field, hung listlessly in the damp air. As they drew near, horn calls echoed from the battlements, and the drawbridge lowered with a rattling chain. Robb's retinue halted, forming ranks. Lord Walder Frey's steward hurried out to greet them, an officious man with an apologetic smile. He bowed deeply to Robb, seemed to sneer at Tywin's manacles, then motioned them to cross. Robb felt a prickle of unease stepping onto that bridge, recalling the day he bargained for passage south with Walder Frey, forced to cede humiliating concessions. He had promised to wed a Frey daughter eventually, among other things. That promise still hung in the air unfulfilled. Inside the courtyard, a handful of Frey men-at-arms waited, as well as some of Walder Frey's brood. One could scarcely walk 10 steps without stumbling over a Frey, or so the saying went. They pressed in, curious about the famed Tywin Lannister in chains, or the fabled young wolf. A small dais had been erected near the main keep, presumably to receive King Joffrey and his retinue when they arrived. Walder Frey himself was nowhere to be seen. Robb did not doubt the old man would appear at the most opportune moment, gloating or complaining in turn. Their party dismounted. The horses were led to stables and Tywin's horse was taken as well, though he remained under heavy guard. The men set about securing lodging in the smaller guest keep, ensuring they could quickly form up if needed. Robb scanned the walls, noting the positions of archers, the thickness of the defenses. The twins were formidable. And now he waited, pacing the courtyard, cloak dripping with the remains of the rain, gray wind at his side. Caitlin stood under an awning, arms wrapped tight across her chest, eyes darting at every sound. Late that evening, torches flared along the ramparts and horn calls announced the arrival of another procession from the south. They crossed the far side of the bridge, a host carrying royal banners, the crowned stag and lion of King Joffrey, as well as the personal arms of House Baratheon and House Lannister. A retinue of gold-cloaked guards accompanied them, and at the forefront rode the Queen's litter, a lavish contraption draped in red velvet. Sentries shouted, gates opened, and the group filed into the courtyard. There must have been close to 300 of them, far exceeding the agreed-upon number. Robb stiffened. Immediately, the Grey John growled under his breath. He and Karstark's men stepped forward, hands on hilts, but Robb gestured for calm. Best not to ignite bloodshed at once. From within the litter emerged Queen Cersei Lannister, clad in a flowing crimson gown that stood in stark contrast to the gloom. Her golden hair caught the torchlight and her chin was raised in a display of regal arrogance. Behind her stepped King Joffrey himself, still a boy in many ways, though the cruelty in his eyes belied any innocence. He wore a crown of twisted gold, a stiff black doublet embroidered with golden lions, and an expression that suggested he believed himself the rightful master of all he surveyed. Robb's breath caught in his chest as he spotted the tall, gaunt shape of his father stepping down from another carriage. Eddard Stark's hair had turned grayer, his face drawn and pallid, and he leaned on a cane as though his leg pained him. But he was alive. Beside him stood Sansa, eyes rimmed with red, hair in tangles. She wore a plain gown, her posture slumped with exhaustion or despair. Robb's heart thundered. A part of him wanted to run forward to embrace his father and sister, but the ring of gold cloaks bristling with spears held him back. This was a moment for caution. Tywin Lannister had been brought forward as well, though he still wore chains on his wrists. Grey wind growled, hackles raised as the Lannister and royal party moved closer. The tension was palpable, like a coiled viper waiting to strike. Joffrey surveyed the courtyard with a sneer, no doubt offended by the lesser grandeur of House Frey's seat. Cersei's gaze flicked past Robb, landing on Tywin. Her features hardened as she took in the iron shackles biting into her father's skin. Then her emerald eyes returned to Robb. "You dare to chain him like a common criminal?" she demanded, voice dripping venom. "He lost that courtesy when he marched to war against my house," Robb replied tersely. "He remains unharmed. Can you say the same for my father?" He nodded toward Ned, who stood with obvious effort, a bruise darkening one cheek, a bandage wrapped about his knee. Ned Stark's eyes lit upon Robb, and for a moment something like relief and sorrow warred in his expression. He murmured hoarsely, "Robb, you've grown." Emotions roiled within Robb. He swallowed them down, forcing composure. "Father," he said softly, dipping his head in respect, but he didn't move closer. This parley was a fragile piece of theater. Any false step could shatter it. Sansa's gaze flicked toward him, tears brimming. "Robb, we will have time for reunions soon," Cersei interjected, voice cold. "First, we conclude our business. Where's Walder Frey?" I expected a host to greet the king. As if on cue, a door creaked open and a swarm of Freys emerged, led by Walder Frey himself, stooped, wrinkled, but possessed of an uncanny spark in his eyes. He was supported by two young wives, half his age. The old man cast a sweeping look at the courtyard, then inclined his head, lips twisting in something that might have been a smirk. "Your Grace, my lords, you honor my humble crossing with your presence." Joffrey's upper lip curled. He was unaccustomed to being so poorly fawned upon. Yet it was Cersei who took command, stepping forward with a regal tilt to her head. "We are here to conduct a royal parley, Lord Frey, concerning the release of traitors and the restitution of certain prisoners." Walder's watery eyes darted to Robb, then to Tywin. Yes, I know. And you want my halls for your official talks, I presume." Fine, come in, be seated. Try not to get blood on the floors." Robb paid him little mind. He was busy meeting his father's gaze across the courtyard, reading the pain and pride in Ned's eyes. They might have tried to break him in the dungeons, but Eddard Stark stood firm, if battered. At his side, Sansa trembled. Robb forced himself to remain outwardly calm. This was not finished yet. Cersei gestured to Ned. "Bring him," she commanded the gold cloaks. They nodded, guiding him carefully. Another set of guards hovered near Sansa. On Robb's side, Tywin was ushered forward by the Great John and Karstark men. Walder Frey led the entire party into the twins' main hall, a cavernous chamber with thick pillars and uneven stone floors, lit by sputtering torches. Long tables had been arranged with simple wooden chairs at the center, presumably for the negotiation. Once inside, Joffrey and Cersei took the position at the head of the table, flanked by a squad of gold cloaks. Robb, with the Great Jon and Karstark, took the opposite side. Tywin and Ned were both situated near the center, as was Sansa, guarded by men from both sides. Walder Frey perched in a high-backed chair slightly off to the side, as though he were hosting a perverse sort of feast. His expression suggested he was enjoying the tension. The rest of the retinues lined the walls, forming a silent ring of watchers, hands on hilts, wary of any betrayal. Joffrey lounged in his seat, fiddling with a jeweled dagger at his belt. He was no older than Robb, yet the cruelty etched on his features seemed timeless. "So," he said in a high, mocking tone, "the northern traitors and their whelp have come to beg for their father's life. Let us begin." Robb bristled at the insult. "I come to secure my father's release," he corrected, voice taut, "in exchange for Lord Tywin Lannister. Our terms were clear. I see my father is alive, for which you can be thankful." "Thankful?" Joffrey echoed, eyes flashing. "You speak to your king, boy. Mind your tongue." Cersei laid a cautioning hand on her son's forearm. "We are here for a diplomatic resolution," she said smoothly, though her expression held little warmth. "You demanded Eddard Stark. We have brought him. Unfortunately, your sister Arya is nowhere to be found. We cannot release what we do not possess." Robb's gaze flicked to Ned, who said nothing, though sorrow weighed on his features. He seemed older than Robb remembered, frilier. Months in a cell had drained him. Yet there was a glimmer of iron behind his eyes. He remained standing, leaning on that cane. He would not kneel to Joffrey or to fear. "So you claim," Robb replied, looking at Cersei. "We require proof that Arya is truly missing. Perhaps she fled. Perhaps you hold her in some secret cell." Joffrey snorted. "We waste time. Here is how this will go: surrender my grandfather to us without those chains and swear fealty to the Iron Throne. In exchange, Eddard Stark and Sansa Stark return with you. That is the agreement. You hold Ser Jaime as well, do you not? Release him, or we will consider your father's life forfeit." Robb's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. "That was not our arrangement. Jaime Lannister is not part of this. The condition was Tywin for my faith." And sister." Joffrey shrugged, exchanging a glance with Cersei. "Consider it a new arrangement." A murmur ran through the hall. Tywin, still in chains, stood silent as a statue, though there was a flicker of approval in his eyes at Joffrey's words. Robb realized that father and daughter might well be of a single mind. They could push for Jaime's release too, no matter the prior terms. This was exactly the kind of shift in demands he had feared. The Great Jon took a step forward, face red with fury. "We will not yield the Kingslayer as well." Karstark added, voice rasping with pent-up rage, "Your father stands before you in irons. What cause have you to push further? Do you mock us?" The gold cloaks tensed, swords half-drawn. Robb lifted a hand to restrain his men. Despite the searing anger in his blood, he knew one spark here could cause a massacre. And with Eddard and Sansa so close, so vulnerable? Cersei's gaze flicked to Walder Frey, as though expecting the old man to intervene. Walder merely tapped his cane on the floor, letting out a phlegmy chuckle. "Continue, do continue," he said with a slight wave, feigning disinterest. Joffrey sneered. "Jaime is worth more than your father, Stark. He is the greatest knight in the realm. You hold him only because of a trick." Robb forced his voice to remain calm. "Trick or not, he is ours. Our original agreement stands, Tywin for Eddard and Sansa. We can discuss Jaime afterward. If you insist on changing terms, we are done here." Cersei's eyes narrowed. She glanced at Tywin, who met her gaze. A silent moment passed between them, and then Tywin gave the barest, subtlest shake of his head. Robb understood. Tywin wanted them to hold firm, but also recognized that pressing too far might unravel everything. The last thing Tywin wanted was to remain a captive. So after a tense beat, Cersei smoothed her robes and said, "Very well. We will abide by the original terms. But know this, as soon as your father is returned to you, we expect Lord Tywin released. If you attempt to leave this place with him still in chains, my archers will see that none of you escape, including Eddard Stark." A hush fell. Robb nodded slowly. "Agreed." "Then do it," Joffrey said with a scowl. "Free my grandfather now." Robb's heart pounded. He had hoped to see Ned physically in his own grasp before removing Tywin's chains. But if they demanded it in front of the entire hall, perhaps the best he could do was secure Ned and Sansa on his side of the table while Tywin was simultaneously unshackled. Anything else might provoke a violent reaction. He looked at his father. Ned's lips were pressed together. "Father," Robb murmured softly, "come here." The gold cloaks hesitated, glancing at Cersei. She gave a slow nod. They parted, letting Ned walk forward, leaning on his cane, Sansa clinging to his arm. Robb felt a surge of emotion at the sight of them crossing the floor. They were thinner, paler, but alive. Gray Wind, who had waited near the edge of the hall, padded forward, tail low, whining as he recognized Ned's scent. Ned paused, placing a trembling hand on the direwolf's head. Sansa let out a small sob at the sight of the great beast, tears sliding down her cheeks. Then Ned lifted his gaze to Robb. His voice was hoarse. "My son." 1,000 words lived in those 2 syllables. Apologies, regrets, pride, relief. Robb wanted to embrace him, but first he had to see to the negotiation. He turned sharply to the Great John and Rickard Karstark, nodding toward Tywin. "Unchain him." The men exchanged uncertain looks. Tywin watched them with hooded eyes. Finally, the Great John reached for the ring of keys. In the hush, each click of metal seemed amplified. He unlocked the shackles, and Tywin rolled his wrists, exhaling softly. Immediately, gold-cloaked guards stepped forward, as if to form a protective wedge around Tywin, but he waved them off. He stood free, regaining his dignity with a slow stretch of his arms. Joffrey smirked, as though relishing the sight of Robb's men having to obey. "That's better." Cersei's gaze flicked to Ned, who stood beside Robb now. Sansa hovered a step behind. "You have your father, Stark," the Queen said. "We will take ours." Robb tried to control his breathing, tried to find words. But all he wanted to do was gather Ned and Sansa up, rush them out of here. He could feel tension crackling in the air, see how Walder Frey looked about, sniffing for drama. Tywin brushed invisible dust from his tunic, ignoring the stares. "I want a moment with my father and sister," Robb said, voice firm. "Then we will depart the twins, and you and yours can be about your way." Cersei let out a small laugh. "Impatient. Very well. We have no taste for Frey hospitality." Tywin moved toward his family, gingerly rubbing at raw wrists. The Great John and Karstark men stepped aside but kept watchful stares, hands resting on sword pommels. The entire tableau felt precarious, like a single spark might set it aflame. Walder Frey coughed wetly, leaning forward on his cane, but said nothing. No doubt he was disappointed not to see more drama. At last Robb let out a breath. He guided Ned a few steps back so the man could lean against a chair. Sansa hovered close, tears on her cheeks. Gray Wind pressed near, muzzle gently brushing her skirts. Robb's throat felt tight as he studied them. His father's stooped form, his sister's trembling figure. He wanted to speak softly, to cradle them, but all he managed was, "We'll be safe soon. We'll leave this place together." Ned squeezed his son's shoulder, exhaustion in his eyes. "You have done impossible things," he said quietly, voice thick with emotion. "I heard rumors of a dragon. They said you—" He trailed off. Sansa's eyes widened, as if she could scarcely imagine it. Robb nodded, giving them the barest of smiles. "It's real, father. His name is Saphrax. But I left it behind so we could come for you." Before more could be said, a commotion rose at the far side of the hall near the wide doors leading back to the courtyard. A gold cloak shoved past a Frey guard, gasping and pointing outside. "Your Grace," he shouted. "Your Grace, come see, there's something." Joffrey rose from his seat, scowling. "What is this nonsense?" He strode to the door, Cersei and Tywin following. The watchers parted, letting them through. Robb felt his stomach lurch, worry spiking. Could it be an ambush? But from whom? The Great John hurried after the king, and Robb, supporting Ned, walked with Sansa behind them. Gray Wind stayed tight at their side, ears perked. Through the open doors, the courtyard lay slick with puddles from the earlier rain. Torches sputtered, casting uneven light. The wind carried a faint smell of wet stone and the musk of horses. By the gatehouse stood a figure in soaked, travel-stained rags, flanked by 2 Frey men-at-arms. The figure's hood was pushed back, revealing a small, pale face and a head of tangled brown hair. A sword belt hung awkwardly around 2 thin hips. The silhouette was that of a child. As the watchers drew closer, they heard the exhausted voice. "I am Arya Stark. You will let me pass." Sansa let out a gasp. Ned stiffened. Robb's heart jumped into his throat. It was Arya, alive, disheveled, her clothes torn and mud-smeared, but undeniably Arya. She clutched a thin sword that looked suspiciously like needle. Her eyes blazed with defiance even as she shivered from head to toe. A stunned silence gripped the courtyard. Finally, one of the fry guards stammered. She arrived at the gate not 5 minutes past, demanding entry. She said she was Lord Eddard's daughter, that we'd all be sorry if we turned her away. Arya raised her chin, glaring at the cluster of Lannisters. You, she said, fixing her gaze on Joffrey, thought you could kill my father, kill my wolf, my friend, but I escaped. You can't keep me locked away forever. Robb felt emotion swell in his chest. Arya, fierce and indomitable, had somehow slipped free and trekked alone through the war-torn lands to reach them. He met Ned's astounded gaze, then stepped forward, ignoring the potential danger. In half a dozen strides, he closed the distance. The fry guards stepped aside, uncertain. Arya looked up, eyes wide, and suddenly her bravado cracked. She lunged into Robb's arms, burying her face against his chest. Robb, she mumbled, her voice muffled. I tried to find you. I've been hiding, running. He held her close, tears stinging his eyes. For a moment, the entire courtyard seemed to blur, the fear and tension receding. Arya, he whispered, smoothing her tangled hair. You're safe now. A hiss of anger broke the moment. Joffrey clenched his fists, face twisting. Guards! Seize her. She belongs to the crown as a traitor's daughter. Cersei laid a hand on his arm, hissing under her breath. We just concluded the exchange, Joffrey. Do not be a fool. Her eyes flicked to Robb. The girl is your sister, I grant you that. But she is still subject to the crown's justice. If you intend to leave with both Sansa and Arya. Of course I do, Robb snapped, voice dangerously low. They are mine, not yours. You claimed she was missing. Now the gods have seen fit to return her at this moment. This matter is settled. Tywin stared at Arya, calculating. Eddard and Sansa, still inside the main hall's threshold, gaped in stunned relief. Ned's face shone with renewed strength, as though a heavy weight had been lifted from him. Sansa's eyes brimmed with tears of joy. But Joffrey fumed. She has threatened the crown by her words. She belongs to us, eh? That was as far as he got before Arya darted forward, slipping out of Robb's grasp, brandishing needle. She glared at the king with open hatred. Gasps sounded around the courtyard and some gold cloaks raised their weapons, but Arya merely spat at the ground. Try and take me again. I dare you. Half the watchers sucked in a breath. Walder Frey chuckled from behind, clearly savoring the spectacle. Tywin's face remained impassive. Grey Wind let out a deep growl, stepping protectively near Arya. Joffrey's eyes blazed with fury, and he might have ordered the archers to loose a volley if not for Cersei's sudden, commanding grip on his shoulder. Enough, the queen said through gritted teeth. This parley is over. My father is free. We are leaving. She shot one last, venomous glance at Robb. Take your whelps. We shall see if you remain so bold without your beast to back you up. A swirl of movement followed as gold cloaks gathered around Cersei, Joffrey, and Tywin, hustling them toward their horses and carriages. Robb stood with Arya in his arms, Ned and Sansa hurrying to join them. The small courtyard crackled with the tension of two forces on the brink of open violence. But both sides had what they wanted. The Lannisters had reclaimed Tywin, and the Starks had their father and sisters. There was no impetus to continue the fight here, in Walder Frey's domain, unless someone lost their nerve. And so each side withdrew warily in the flickering torchlight. Walder Frey barked at his men to let the visitors pass. No one lingered to exchange farewells or courtesy. The Lannister carriages rattled away, heading back across the bridge. Joffrey and Cersei withdrew behind a screen of gold cloaks. Tywin rode at their side, stiff-backed and silent, his expression impossible to read. Trumpets sounded from the far ramparts, announcing their departure. Robb watched them go, relief and anxiety mingled in his chest. He had his father and sisters now, but the cost was high. Tywin was free, and the realm's war might well continue. At least they had parted without bloodshed. In the aftermath, Walder Frey cackled quietly, leaning on his cane. Gone already? Such a pity. I was just ordering the feast. None of the Starks rose to the bait. Robb helped Ned stay upright, Arya hovering close, Sansa tearful, Grey Wind watchful as always. The Greyjohn and Karstark men closed around them, forming a protective shield, half expecting some last treachery from the Freys. But Walder only gave a dismissive wave. Off with you then. Go, before I think to charge a toll. Robb wanted nothing more than to leave this place. He offered the old lord a curt nod and led his family and men across the courtyard, through the gate, back onto the bridge. Nights and days of tension suddenly crashed over him, leaving him lightheaded. Ned leaned on his arm. He was weak, but he managed to walk under his own power with the cane's assistance. Sansa clutched Arya, weeping softly. Arya, though exhausted, remained defiant and determined, glancing behind them as if expecting a final pursuit. Only once they were safely across the bridge and rejoined their mounts did Robb finally pause. He turned to face his father fully. Ned looked upon him with wonder that mingled with sorrow, as though uncertain how much time had passed between them and what it had wrought. Robb embraced him, inhaling the faint scent of damp clothes and the worn leather of Ned's tunic. "Father," he murmured, voice cracking. Ned's arms came around him, shaky but certain. "My son," he whispered, voice choked. "I am sorry for all of this. I never wanted you to bear these burdens." Robb felt tears threaten, but he blinked them away, pulling back. "We're together now. That's what matters." He glanced at the girls. Sansa was pale and trembling, half lost in her relief, while Arya stared up at the starless sky as if searching for the next threat. "We have you both back," he said, voice quiet. "We'll return to Riverrun for a time. We have an army waiting." And he paused, recalling that Ned had heard only rumors. "Father, we truly do have a dragon, a living dragon that helped us defeat Tywin Lannister. Her name is Saphrax. She's waiting. We can talk more once you've rested." Ned nodded, eyes distant. "I heard the stories. I hardly believed, but if it's true," he looked at his son with something akin to awe. "I am proud of you, Robb. Of what you've done for our family." Robb's throat tightened. "I only did what I had to do." They mounted horses, Ned awkwardly requiring help from the great Jon, while Sansa and Arya took borrowed mares. The retinue turned north, aiming to put distance between themselves and the twins before night fell fully. Though weary, they pressed on, traveling an hour or more until they found a secure copse of trees and set camp. Fires flickered in the darkness, casting dancing shadows on the trunks. Tents rose swiftly, forming a small ring around Ned's position as well as that of his daughters. Robb made sure watchmen posted lookouts in every direction, half expecting Lannister outriders or Frey treachery. But the night remained still, broken only by the rustling of leaves and distant hoots of owls. In a tent near the center, Ned rested on a pallet of furs. Sansa and Arya sat beside him, each with a bowl of hot stew. They picked at the food, too tense to eat much, but the warmth seemed to help. Catelyn joined them soon, dropping to her knees beside Ned and embracing him with tears of relief. Robb lingered at the entrance, giving them space. He could hear snippets of murmured conversation. Ned apologizing, Sansa sobbing, Arya insisting she had done just fine on her own. Catelyn's voice was thick with gratitude. It was a scene of family reunited after near tragedy. Robb felt both joy and sorrow, knowing this was but one battle won. The war still churned around them. A short time later, the tent flap stirred, and Catelyn emerged. She wiped her eyes, seeing Robb in the torchlight. "He's asleep," she said softly. "Sansa, too. Arya refuses to sleep, but I think the exhaustion will claim her soon enough." Robb nodded, mind spinning. "They'll be safe now." She nodded, her gaze drifting. "We have them back." Then her eyes snapped to his, uncertain. "But we lost Tywin. He's free to rebuild his armies, to conspire with the crown, to stoke Joffrey's cruelty. We still have Jaime, but do we have the strength to force peace?" Robb let out a ragged breath. "I don't know, Mother. I only know we saved Father. I would pay that price again. If Tywin musters more men, we'll face them. If Joffrey remains on the throne, we'll find a way to keep our family safe. And we have the dragon. No matter what moves they make, they cannot unmake that advantage." She reached out, squeezing his hand. "You've grown so strong. Your father will be amazed when he sees the man you've become." He tried to smile, but weariness tugged at him. "I don't feel so strong. The war is still raging. But at least we have hope." A breeze stirred the torch, sending shadows dancing. "In the morning, we ride for Riverrun. Father needs a maester's care. And from there, we'll plan our next move. Perhaps now we can negotiate from a place of greater unity." Catelyn nodded. They stood together in the hush of night, the swirl of campfires around them. The cold wind carried the sense of pine and damp earth. And in that moment, for all the battles to come, all the uncertain roads ahead, Robb felt a measure of peace. He had accomplished what he set out to do: reclaim his father, protect his sisters. Though the realm might slip deeper into chaos, though Tywin and Joffrey might seek revenge, though the fate of the Seven Kingdoms hung on the edge of a dragon's wing, For one fleeting moment, he held close the victory that mattered most. His family's life. They left before dawn, riding through the gray hush, the column forging north and west at a steady pace. Every hour, Ned seemed to regain a bit of vitality, though his wound still hampered him. Sansa scarcely spoke, haunted by memories of King's Landing, clinging to Arya's hand whenever possible. Arya occasionally rode ahead, defiant, scanning the trees for threats. She was filthy and underfed from her time in hiding, but proud that she had found her way back. In this subdued procession, they eventually rejoined the main host on the outskirts of the Riverlands, greeted by horns and shouts of welcome. The men gaped at the sight of Ned Stark, alive and free, as well as Arya. Saffrax was the first to greet Robb with a resonant roar that made the horses whinny and rear. Ned, half in disbelief, beheld the dragon with his own eyes. The look on his face was priceless, a mixture of awe and lingering shock that such a beast could exist at all. Robb guided him closer, letting Ned see the intelligence in Saffrax's pale gaze. Gray wind prowled around them, tail swishing. It was a moment that defied all the traditions of the realm. Eddard Stark, stoic warden of the North, returning to find his son a dragon rider, his daughters battered by captivity and flight, and the war still raging but forever changed. And so began the next chapter of House Stark's struggle, father and son reunited, a dragon in their arsenal, and the knowledge that Tywin Lannister, freed from captivity, would not rest until the scales were balanced. Joffrey, from his iron seat in the south, would brood over the humiliation inflicted upon him. The rumor of Arya Stark's fearless blade would travel from tavern to tavern, stoking legends of the wolf girl who spat in a king's face. Sansa's quiet heartbreak would need tending, and Ned's injuries would require time and care. Yet for all these burdens, the Starks stood together now, forging a path forward in a kingdom that trembled at the very mention of dragons returning to the sky. They settled for a time at Riverrun, welcoming Ned and the girls into its battered but sturdy walls. Maester Vyman treated Ned's leg, bound Sansa's bruises, and insisted Arya eat double portions to recover her strength. Catelyn hovered anxiously, ensuring her family was made comfortable. Meanwhile, the Northern Lords clamored for a grand feast to celebrate Lord Stark's safe return. Robb allowed a modest banquet, a chance for the men to share laughter and rejoice in some measure of success. Though overshadowed by the knowledge that Tywin was free, the night of the feast still blazed with torchlight and the raucous sound of victory songs. Ned sat at the high table, flank supported by pillows, a cup of watered wine trembling in his hand. He gazed upon his son with quiet wonder. And when Great John Umber rose to offer a toast, calling Robb the Dragon Wolf, the entire hall roared with approval, mugs sloshing ale onto the floor. Ned smiled, though a sadness lingered at the corners of his mouth. He understood too well how heroes in war could become martyrs if fortune shifted. Robb joined his father after the feast, helping him back to his chambers. They walked slowly through the corridors of Riverrun, torchlight dancing on stone walls. At the threshold, Ned paused, leaning on his cane, and turned to Robb. "I have missed so much," Ned said, "but I know you have carried this family on your shoulders. I see the changes in you, the burdens etched on your brow. No father wishes to see his son bear the cost of war, yet you have done so bravely." He swallowed. "I'm proud of you, more than I can say." Robb's throat felt thick. "Father, Ned raised a hand. "I did not expect to find you a dragon lord, nor to hear of your victories over Tywin, nor to see how the men follow you so fiercely. But I am not blind to the dangers. War has a way of devouring victories, no matter how grand. And a dragon, that is a power that draws envy and fear from every corner of the realm. Be careful, my son." Robb nodded, fighting the urge to embrace Ned right there in the hall. He settled for placing a hand on his shoulder. "I'll be careful," he promised. "But if the Lannisters think to use father's abduction again, or threaten the North, we'll show them we can't be trifled with. Saffrax is an advantage they cannot match. We must use it, or lose all we've gained." Ned's face was solemn. "Use it wisely, then." With that, Robb helped him into the room, where Catelyn and the girls waited. He left them to share a moment of peace, stepping back into the corridor. A swirl of conflicting emotions weighed on him. Relief at his father's return, pride at how far he'd come, dread of the continuing war. He exhaled, letting the hush of the castle envelop him. In time, he made his way to the courtyard, where Saphrax slumbered against the outer wall, scaled flank rising and falling in deep, reptilian breaths. The air was crisp. Stars twinkled overhead, an endless canopy of silent witnesses. Robb approached the dragon, resting a hand on its warm hide. He closed his eyes, feeling the slow, ancient power of each breath. He remembered the night in the tent, the lightning, the first crack of the egg. The swirl of improbable fate that had carried him from boy to warlord, from dreamer to one who soared on dragon wings. He thought of the battles won, the lives lost, the uncertain horizon. And he whispered softly, "We saved them, old friend. But more trials await." The dragon exhaled, a gentle snort that ruffled Robb's hair. For a moment, the courtyard felt timeless, as though the old gods themselves watched from the trees that no longer grew in this southern stone fortress. Perhaps, Robb mused, this was how it had always meant to be, a Stark forging a path with a creature of fire, bridging old bloodlines of the first men and Valeria's vanished glory, forging a future no one could have foreseen. He allowed himself a small, weary smile, stroked the dragon's neck once more, then turned away to find some rest. The war was not over. The realm was not yet at peace. Tywin Lannister would strike again, Joffrey would fume on his throne, and the game would continue. But for this single night, Robb let himself believe in the victory won. His father and sisters safe, his army united, a powerful ally coiled in the courtyard. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they would face them as Starks. And if the South sought to burn them out, then the Dragon Wolf would answer fire with fire.